Good evening all and welcome. The Mortis Media app is finally out for people on Android, and for everyone else on Apple, it will be out very soon. This is what it looks like. You can select the type of story you want, select the story itself, adjust the parameters within the app, and finally play around with the background music and sound effects. Level them, layer them. Play all the sound effects you want. Rain in this case, or any others that you want to throw in, you can do that. It's a lot of fun, and I would really appreciate it if you guys could download it, give me your honest feedback, and leave a review and a star rating. That's all I'm asking, and it would mean the absolute world to me. Tonight we're going to listen to how it would sound like on the app, with a selection of stories and of course some nice rain background to keep us busy. But for now it's time to get comfortable. Don't forget to download and leave that review, and let the darkness take control. Every year for summer holidays, me and my family go to my grandparents' house in a region in France called Bretagne, and they have the luck to live on a cliff right next to the beach, which is pretty neat. And for you to understand the situation I was in, I'll do a quick description of the place, and most importantly, how to access the beach. When we get out of the house, we need to cross a little road to get to an entrance between bushes. Then it's a clear but narrow path that you can take to just enjoy the view of the sea, or you can also go to a staircase built in the rock of the cliff. Then you'll just have to walk on medium-sized stones, and ta-da! You've arrived to the beach. The place itself is pretty big, but there's only a few ways to access it. By the staircase I described, or by another one at the other end of it. Also, the big thing to mention, as I grew older, I stopped building sandcastles and swimming with my family. I'm 18, and the older of 3 siblings that are way younger than me, so I was done playing childish games. And I had started to climb on the cliffs for fun. Not the steep ones, it was more or less the semi-hiking of partially collapsed cliffs. This will be relevant later. Last year, after having dinner, I headed out for a little walk on the beach. No one seemed interested in coming with me, so I went alone. No big deal, I did it every evening. After going down the staircase, I walk a little bit, and then sat down on a stone to smoke a joint and listen to some music. Not really smart, but hey, I'm a teen in a little village that I go to every summer, and as much as I love my family, it gets pretty boring from time to time. I'm enjoying my me time, when I spot a guy from the corner of my eye, about 40 meters away from me. No big deal. It's a free access beach after all. But then he starts heading towards me. His head was shaved, and he had square-shaped glasses on, maybe around mid-20s to early 30s. He was pretty tan, like he worked outside, and the bald dude continued getting closer. I mean, I can't say anything, I don't own the beach. As he's approaching me, I hear over my music that he's trying to speak to me. I removed my headphones, and he said something along the lines of, "Hey, you look familiar. Have we met before?" No. He kept insisting that he saw me at the beach today. And sure, I said, "Yeah, well, maybe, but there are tons of people at the beach. I don't remember seeing everyone I saw." The way I responded clearly implies that I'm not interested in having this conversation with him. But he sits right next to me, and he keeps talking, mostly about himself, and that he loves the beach, that the weather is nice, and that I'm nice with him. Here's when things got creepy. He says that it's rare to find nice girls, and that he's happy I'm not like the other girls. He then asks me about my name, where I live, and of course I don't say anything. He starts to lean in closer, which made me feel very uncomfortable, with a huge grin on his face. That's when it hit me. Remember when I said that there was only a few entrances to the beach? That guy was sitting right between me and the staircase. I was cornered,
No one was there, and we were completely alone. And even though I'm quite athletic, I'm 4'9" and weigh 90 pounds, this guy is twice my size, and he clearly wants to continue our discussion. As I'm not responding, he starts to sound annoyed, clenching his fists, but still with that stupid grin glued to his face. He asked me if I really was a good girl, and why don't I talk to him. I'm bricking it at this point. I look to my left, and almost let out a sigh of relief. One of the cliffs I'm used to climbing is right next to us, and I know I could rush up in a matter of seconds, and I used to do it running. Run on a narrow path and get straight home. So I got up and said, "I don't want to talk to you anymore. Good evening." He looked startled for a moment, looking back to me in the staircase, which confirmed my suspicions. He thought he had blocked my only way of escape, since the other stairs were far away. To this day it still scares me that it was his first reaction. At this point I'm high, tired, and terrified, but I start to walk confidently to the cliff at my high pace, and in the corner of my eye I can see that he is standing, looking in my direction. As soon as I'm close enough, I literally start to jump from rock to rock as fast as I can, scratching myself in the process. When I scramble to the top, I look down and he's looking at me, not smiling like before, but frowning, a look which tells me he's on the verge of committing a crime. I then sprinted to my grandparents' house, which lucky is really close, and explained everything to my mother the next day. I reported the guy to the police station, giving the best description that I could, since it is a small village, and they could apprehend him easily if he was a resident. So yeah, I made it out. What did this guy actually have planned? I'm glad I didn't have to stick around to discover what it was. In 2013, I moved into an apartment in Alma, Arkansas. I'm not sure if this had anything to do with it, but the apartment complex was right next to a very old graveyard. A little history on this apartment complex. I had lived there 3 times before: 2003, 2006, and 2009. Each time I got the same 1-bedroom apartment, number 208. It was always the only 1-bedroom available. Each time I would have strange things happen there. The first time cabinets would open, things would be in different places, and sometimes when I'd take a shower and close my eyes, I'd see the bathroom and shower covered in blood, and blood coming out the shower. I'd open my eyes, and it would be normal. The first time I lived there, that stuff intrigued me. I only moved out to move in with my girlfriend. Alma has very few options for apartments, and in 2006, when my girlfriend and I split up, I had to go back to the same apartment complex, and lo and behold, the exact same day I split with my girlfriend, the people living in 208 suddenly move out, and for the second time, I got the same apartment. It seemed a little weird, but I just wrote it off as a coincidence. This time, things were worse. I'd hear movements in my walk-in wardrobe and living room at night. The shower visions were more intense, and also while I was living here, did I get sleep paralysis. My first sleep paralysis episode was terrifying. I was laying asleep on the ground next to my new girlfriend, and at about 1 AM, I heard a DVD rack in the living room fall, and a lot of DVDs crashing to the floor. I was still half asleep when I looked towards my bedroom door, which I kept shut, and on this night, I had accidentally left my bathroom light on, and I could see the light right under the doors, but as I turned my head to the direction of the noise, and was about to holler out who's there, I hear running footsteps, like a kid. Then I saw the shadow of feet at the base of my bedroom door, in the bathroom light. No filler shadow, just the feet, and in a blink of an eye they moved from the door to my chest and disappeared. This all happened so fast, and I couldn't move or speak. But after seeing the shadow feet on my chest, I went to shake my girlfriend awake, but my arms couldn't move. So I say her name, but I couldn't speak. So in panic I try and sit up, but couldn't move at all. My eyes began to get heavy, and in a second I was dreaming of a shadow holding me down, covering my mouth. I fought and widened my eyes, and it was still there. I'm finally able to make noise, but it's just a raspy, pitiful help that is barely a whisper, and I'm able to slightly move my finger and touch my girlfriend. It's enough, and she opens her eyes and asks me what's wrong. I let out my pitiful help again as I widen my eyes in fear at my chest. My girlfriend starts shaking me, and when I don't respond, she slaps me. In an instant, the shadow is gone, and I'm awake and able to move. My girlfriend says she never heard the DVDs crashing and did not see the shadow. The DVDs were all still on the rack when I go to check the living room. My girlfriend witnessed and pulled me out of 3 more sleep paralysis episodes over the next few months, before leaving me because it freaked her out so badly. And then I moved out. Fast forward to 2009. I had married in 2007 and had a son that same year and a daughter in 2009. But my wife and I split, and I needed a place to stay, and once again had to go back to the same apartment complex. I couldn't afford anything better. Once again, for the 3rd time, the only apartment available is 208. But I didn't want to be homeless, so I asked the landlord if I could move into 208, and if it could be temporary. If another apartment opens up, he'll let it to me. He says yes, and I move in. But after 2 weeks of bloody visions, noises, and 2 more sleep paralysis episodes, I move out and stay with family. My wife and I got back together in 2013. We split for good and got split custody, and I needed a local place to live. And because this time I needed a 2-bedroom apartment, and knowing there is no chance of getting 208 because it's 1 bedroom, I go back to the complex and ended up getting 210. Which is right next to 208. The even number apartments are on the 2nd floor, the odd on the bottom. 210 was the only available 2-bedroom apartment, so I take it and tell myself at least it's not 208. Nothing happened. At first, my kids and I really make it our home, and then it begins. One night I'm in my room and it's 2:30 in the morning. And I hear my kids banging toys around and giggling in their room, and I heard the TV come on, and it wakes me up. Irritated, I call out, "You guys are supposed to be asleep. Don't make me ground you." The banging and giggling stops, but I still hear the TV going, and I get up and walk to their shut doors, still half asleep, and say, "Okay, kiddos, I told you to go back to..." As I begin opening their door, it occurs to me that my kids are at their mum's. I had taken them back to her the evening before. A chill runs down my body as I slowly push the door open and see toys strewn all about and cartoons playing on TV. I turn the lights on, unplug the TV, and then bolt to the living room, shutting their door behind me. I turned all the lights on in the apartment and sat up on edge all night. Nothing else happens, but the next week, while my kids were there, I'd catch my 3-year-old daughter talking to somebody when my 6-year-old son wasn't around her. So I asked her who she talked to, and she replied, "My friend's old mum. Her kid got burned up, so she's nice to me because I look like her little girl." My daughter said this word for word, and usually she couldn't talk that plain. I immediately called her mum and asked her who'd she been having watch over them, but she says that it's just cartoons. I once again got a chill down my entire body. My son never saw what Alexis saw. Over the next few months, my little girl continued to talk about old mum, sometimes even pointing behind me, telling me she's watching me to make sure I'm a good daddy. Very creepy. Over the past few years, my little girl has gotten to like spooky stuff and is fascinated with scary shows and movies. but at this time she was only 3 and had never even seen scary stuff, so I was really getting concerned and had a hard time sleeping. Then one night, I was reading a kid's book called The Monster in My Closet to my kids. They lay in bed as I was sitting in the chair next to the bed, and at the end of the book is a page that says for the kid reading to draw the monster in their closet. This gave me an idea. I told my daughter to draw the old mum for me. She sits up, I give her a pencil and the book, and she says, "Can you move, Daddy? She's behind you and I can't see her." I scoot away a little, and my girl looks in the direction where I sat before, then looks down, draws a little, looks up again, then draws some more, and continues to do this until she finishes. She hands me the picture. I look at it, and I begin to tremble and my heart races. That weekend, we moved to an apartment in the next town over. Some might say it was her imagination, and she just made up the drawing. But she was 3, and I believe if she made it up, she wouldn't have taken her eyes off the paper as she drew it. But she kept looking up as she drew, and that tells me she was looking at old Mum while drawing her, in order to reference. Now that you can see the drawing, you will understand why we moved. This happened a few months ago, but it still freaks me out. One night, me, my parents, and my siblings were in the bathroom brushing our teeth, getting ready to go to bed, when our dog all of a sudden just laid by the stairs. Suddenly though, I guess she heard something move or something, because she got up all of a sudden and walked over to my little sister's room, and she just froze. Mind you, there was nothing in that room besides the furniture that she was already familiar with. The door was wide open, and it was pitch black in the room, but my dog freaked out and began barking like crazy, showing her teeth and everything. Her fur stood upright, and she was slowly backing away from the room, not once losing sight of whatever she was watching. My family and I just kind of turned on each other thinking, what? But my dad is a real skeptic when it comes to these things, so he calls back the dog, went into the room and turned the light on. Nothing, of course. Needless to say, my sister was pretty hesitant to sleep there, but my dad told her to quit the crap, so she did. Our dog, who normally always sleeps at her bedside, stayed safely at the door. So then we kind of forgot about the incident. It didn't happen again, and my dog seemed to have gotten over it as well. A few days passed, and my younger siblings were asleep while me and my parents were watching some TV downstairs. All of a sudden, my sister comes racing downstairs crying and is absolutely terrified because someone was knocking on her bed. Now, me and my mum were a little freaked out, especially when she remembered the incident with our dog. But we didn't want to make it worse, so we told her it was probably nothing, and she eventually went back to bed, only after my mum tucked her in. A couple of days passed again. This time we were all ready in bed. My sister was asleep, and I think my parents were too. But I could hear my brother moving around in his room and shutting down his computer, so I knew he was awake. I lay on my stomach, faced away from the door, just scrolling on my phone, when all of a sudden I feel someone push at the end of my bed, causing it to kind of shake. It was so real the way my bed moved, that at first I was 100% sure it was my brother trying to freak me out. So I just said, "Cut it out, Stephen," and I kept scrolling. I didn't even look behind me, and it happened again. I repeated myself, this time more frustrated. Then it happened a third time. This time I spun around, fully prepared to yell at Stephen, but there was nobody. I literally just froze. I grabbed my covers tighter, and my heart was racing in my chest. I was contemplating what to do. Do I call my brother? Do I just jump to the door and run? I was picturing this whole movie scenario where I was going to be dragged down the stairs, so I was very frightened to move. But then it got even freakier. As I'm laying there contemplating what to do, someone knocks on the bottom of my mattress. It happened 3 times, and it was strong enough to actually move it. I think I finally snapped at that moment. When I tell you I sprinted, I mean put me in the Olympics sprinted. I ran out of my room, yelled for my brother, and woke up everyone, and just freaked the hell out. My dad inspected the room for me like I was 6 again, and I eventually slept in my brother's room on the spare mattress. I still don't know what the hell could have done that, but I'm not hoping to find out. This particular event happened to me 3 years ago. I am a student at a university in a small town in Germany, but at the time this happened, I was studying German at a language school in Berlin. So yes, German is also not my mother tongue, and I was also pretty naive about my surroundings, as I came from a third world country. Everything outside the house is a hunting ground for the predator out there, as my dad would always put it. But my dad would constantly give me the impression that the first world countries are supposed to be really safe and regulated. Basically, the opposite of where we came from. So that's the mindset I've been going with, and it worked up until this happened. It started out innocently enough. In Berlin, there is an annual event called Carnaval der Kulturen. You get the idea. Parades with different songs, dances, costumes from different countries, and also stands with food and individual performances of different cultures. It was a big thing, and I had a great day. Now, originally, I planned to go home after it finished at around 6 to 7 p.m, but my friends wanted to hang out a bit more, so we hung out until about 10:30 p.m. Now, it is important to note that all of my friends live at the east side of the city, and I the west. So when it was time to go home, we rode a couple of stations together before we parted ways, and I wasn't worried for going home alone at all. I mean, it wasn't even midnight yet, and this was the weekend, so there are going to be many people, right? Nope. When I split ways with my friends to ride a different train, the station was surprisingly empty. There was a couple on one side of the platform, and there was a guy on the far end of the other. So I took a seat on a nearby bench. The board says that the next train is coming in 15 minutes, which explained why the station was so empty. I had just missed the train. But no problem. 15 minutes isn't that long a wait. But boy, was it going to be the longest 15 minutes of my life. So, the guy on the far end of the platform I was waiting on walked in my general direction. He appears to be talking, but I didn't pay much attention to him, because I thought he was on the phone or something, and I was busy looking around, wondering if the train is going to come sooner. But as he got closer, I noticed how he is walking to my direction, on the bench, and still talking. No phone in sight. Okay, weird. But maybe he wanted to sit down. But what he did was stopped about 2 meters in front of me, gesturing with his hands, and at first I couldn't hear him. He smiled at me. I was caught off guard, looked at him strangely and said, "Sorry?" I found it strange that some random person would smile at me, and I believe said something in English and not German. But I didn't want to be impolite. Perhaps he needed help. "Girl, why don't you smile?" he repeated, in a pretty heavy African accent. What a weird question. So I just looked at him and didn't know what to say. "Why don't you smile? Smile, girl, you look beautiful when you smile." I was weirded out at this point, because first of all, I'm a pretty socially awkward person, and I'm not used to someone trying to hit on me. Or, that is what I initially thought. But this guy looked to be in his mid-40s, and is probably about 190 centimeters or more. I was 20 at the time, but I wasn't really looking into anyone older, so I mustered up a weak, awkward laugh. I guess he must have thought that was a green light, because he immediately lurched forward to sit close to me and asked if I spoke English, to which I said, yes, which in hindsight was stupid, as then he started asking for my name, age, where I came from, and bombarding me with all these questions, all the while caressing my thigh. I was so shocked at that moment. I tried to get away from his touch, but he still did it, seemingly unaware. I was not stupid, so I gave him a fake name and said I was 18. I thought that would deter him, but I was never more wrong, because then he started to get excited, introduced himself that he was 42 and had just come from Cameroon, and eagerly asked for my phone number, to which I said I didn't remember, which is true. But then this guy said I should go to my contacts and see my own phone number. He was smart, and I was just pretending to go along with it, because who knows how he would react otherwise. But the good thing was, he didn't bring his phone with him, and he kept insisting that we go somewhere to ask to borrow a pen. I replied with, "No, sorry, I have to go home soon," and then he proceeded to insist on taking me home. At this point, a couple noticed that something was wrong, but didn't try and help, and just kind of looked at us weirdly. I was very scared, and thought of my family at home, and how I might go missing after this. So then, I tried to answer his increasingly personal questions as vague as possible. I mean, at this point, a normal guy would notice I'm not interested, right? But he seemed unbothered and unaware, happily yapping away. The train came. Waves of relief washed over me, so I interrupted him and excused myself. He insisted I should stay and take the next train, but I said no, that I have to get home, and someone's waiting for me, and started to step towards the train. He grabbed my arm, just as I was taking my first step, and said, "Girl, I think you should stay a while with me. You can take the next train. I can take you home." I was freaking out really bad on the inside, but I managed to muster the most polite rejection possible. "I'm sorry, I need to go home now." I yanked my arm free and entered the train. I was relieved to see him sitting on the bank, and I thought it was the end. Just a bad night. I wish it were the end. As the warning chimes came in, warning passengers that the train doors were about to close, he stopped the train doors from closing and squeezed between them. My heart stopped, and he walked to my seat, which is a 2x2 seat, and he sat right in front of me saying, "Let me take you home. It's not safe out there for girls like you," while caressing both my thighs. Right. I tried to inch away from him. Now in the seats behind us were a group of teenagers, around 17 to 18. They sensed something was wrong because of my expressions, because they suddenly all fell quiet and just looked at each other. But then again, none of them did anything. So I have this guy asking me where I live, insisting he'll walk me home. At this point, I'm trying to think up plans on how to ditch this guy. But I can't go against a 190 centimeter tall dude as a medium-sized 167 centimeter girl. I need to be smarter about this. So I thought. I told him okay, but he can only drop me off at the station. He seemed really happy with that, but he said I needed to give him my number. My initial reaction was, what the hell? I can buy a new number. So I agreed. My station came around. We got off the train, and in front of the station is where another level of creepiness unfolds. "Okay, this is me. I can walk home now by myself as you promised," I said, hoping this was all over. And then he was insisting on getting my phone number. But at this time it was 11:30 p.m. and everything was closed. So he took out a bunch of keys from his pocket and asked me to write down my number on the gravels so that he could come back the next day and take notes of it. I was weirded out, but whatever. And so I tried to write down my number and thought I could sneak in some false number there and throw him off. In the middle of doing it, he kinda yanked my phone to see if I was writing the numbers right. "You gotta make sure you write it right so I can reach you tomorrow," he said. But thankfully it didn't work. I mean, the gravels move around a lot, and he wasn't able to see the numbers. He seemed agitated, and this is where I thought that I might get taken. "Girl, you're the most beautiful girl I've ever seen. I don't want to lose you. What am I gonna do now?" He was mumbling the whole time about borrowing a pen from a passing stranger. The street was still pretty much empty, but there were 3 to 4 people passing by. I think they knew something was amiss. However, as before, no one did a thing. The whole time I was just kind of grimacing awkwardly, if you know what I mean, because I was just scared out of my wits. The whole time his eyes were on me, scrutinizing every detail of my face. I felt like screaming for help, but I don't know if anyone is going to help me judging from the reactions I got so far. And then he asked, "Don't you like me? Am I too old?" He was emphasizing his age. I didn't want to agitate this guy, so I said, "No, it's not that. It's just that I already have a boyfriend." I was cringing, bracing for impact. His face contorted in annoyance, and then he took a deep breath and asked, "Where's your boyfriend? Is he here?" To which I replied, "Yes. You're young. You date. But maybe you don't find him good. You should keep your options open," he said. Well, I'll be damned. Now he's talking about options. Like I had any at that moment? And then without missing a beat, he told me that the only way we were going to do this is for me to meet him exactly at this place tomorrow, and that he's going to trust me, and asked me to set the time. I initially said, "I don't know, you decide." But he said, "No, you tell me when. So you have to come tomorrow. Think, girl." I was panicking and just blurted out, 3 p.m. "Okay, girl, 3 p.m. I trust you." He kind of lets his grip on my hips loose, so I thought I was free. But no. He started leaning in for a kiss, to which I automatically backed out of. "No, not on the lips," he said while touching my lips with his finger. "On the cheek." He said that while giving me the wettest smooch on both cheeks. I struggled so hard to not wipe at that very moment, because I really didn't want to agitate him. So I awkwardly laughed and said, "Okay, now I'm gonna go home. See you then." To which he said, 3 p.m. I trust you. And I just laughed awkwardly and said goodbye. I made an unnecessary turn ahead and hid in the bushes in case he decided to follow me. I waited for a minute or two and booked it straight home. At home, I was freaking out. I called up to one of my friends and started crying. I also washed my face twice while violently scrubbing. I recounted the whole event with my best German to my housemate, who was an older lady in her 70s. And she just said, "Oh, that happens around here to young ladies. He probably just fancies you." I was baffled, but whatever. It was over, and needless to say, I stayed home for 2 days straight, not wanting to run into that creep again, as we don't live very far from the station. A long time ago, my job had an office near the Canadian border in Washington state. I often had to travel over there to help out and help train staff. Being a guy in my late 20s, single, and liked to get away for a few days, I was always up to making extra cash by volunteering to go wherever they needed me. I usually would fly up there, but some occasions when I needed to bring equipment or materials, I would drive. This one particular time was about 17 years ago. We had brought a bunch of equipment, wholesale, and needed to deliver this and some other odds and ends up to our office in Washington State. Of course, everyone knew I would volunteer to drive. I was told to drive a box truck up there and leave it and fly back. Prior to this, I would drive a company car or SUV. But no worries, the box truck wasn't that big, and probably the same size as one of those U-Haul rental trucks. I always preferred to start my driving journey towards the end of the day, mostly because I am one of those people who likes night driving. For the majority of my journey, it was uneventful. I only stopped at a gas station and the occasional rest stop to take care of nature's call. At some point, near the California-Oregon border, is when things started to get bad. It was approximately 1 a.m. I had stopped at a rest area, probably the last one on the California side. On the far distance, I do remember seeing some truckers parked, but basically the rest of the parking lot was empty. Now at this point, I wasn't thinking anything creepy or out of the normal. I just get out of my truck and go into the restroom to take care of business. I wash up a bit and take my sweet time stretching my legs and walk over to my truck. I notice a vehicle parked next to mine. It was literally like this whole parking lot, and this person pulls up next to me? Oh well, I jump in my truck and continue on my journey. About 10 to 20 miles down the freeway, my truck starts acting funny. Some of the interior lights begin flickering. I don't really think anything of it, and a little while later all of the lights in the vehicles go out. Interior lights, running lights, headlight. It's 2 a.m. and I'm in some wooded area of Oregon. I can't even find a flashlight in the truck cabin. I get so angry, not sure if being scared to drive 60 miles an hour in the middle of what seemed like a scene out of Tales from the Dark Side. But I pound my fist on the dashboard and scream at the truck. Almost instantly, everything came back on. I felt like Fonzie. At the next upcoming rest stop, I decide to pull over again, and perhaps from adrenaline, I had to pee like never before. I jump out of the truck and went to the restroom, although this time I didn't take that long inside, and walked out. I remember I was contemplating staying here until dawn, or just trooper on. As I walk up to my truck, I see an older guy, kind of heavy set with grey hair. He's standing next to my truck. I didn't see his vehicle near mine, but just assumed he was stretching his legs. As I walk up, he starts a conversation about the weather or something. A very light snow was falling, but not the kind of stuff that stays on the ground. I wasn't really paying much attention to him, because my first impression was that he was just a lonely old guy who wanted to chit-chat. Then he said something that made my hair stick up. He's looking at my truck and says, "Are you having mechanical problems?" I stopped in my tracks and felt blood rush to my head and just said, "Nope, just driving and trying to stay out of the cold." He then tells me that he doesn't live too far from here and that I would be welcome to join him for a hot coffee if I needed to sleep on his sofa. That kind of gave me the creeps. But me thinking to myself, if I needed, I could take this guy out. I thought I'm younger and stronger and not afraid to defend myself. So I basically end the conversation with, "Well, I better get back on the road before the snow really starts to fall." As I'm driving away, I see that he is walking behind the restroom. So I think to myself, what the heck was that all about? My mind is racing. I'm retracing my last few stops. And how did this guy know I was having electrical problems with my truck? I suddenly think back to the stop in California and the car that was parked next to my truck. Could he have done something to my wiring while I was taking my sweet time? A few more miles down the road, no new issues with my electrical, but I decide that at the next gas station I will stop. I pull up to a gas station, and in Oregon, they don't let you pump your own gas, so I wait for the attendant, and then decide to go in and get a drink. I paid, and as I'm waiting for my fueling, I walk around my truck and look at signs of tampering, and up near the front fender of the truck, I see some smears, but I'm not really sure if it's from the road, snow, or what. I tell myself, okay, you're just freaking out. I jump back into my truck, and as I pull out the gas station, I have to make a turn around to get back to the side where the ramp is on. And as I'm turning, and just about to exit the lot, I see a car parked in the corner, and someone sitting inside. I think to myself, am I just freaking out? Seeing shadows in every corner? It's just a few hours before dawn. Maybe in the morning I will laugh at this. But am I being followed and set up? Did I interrupt that old guy when he came out the restroom so fast? Was he following me and waiting for the right time and place? For whatever he had in mind? Perhaps wanting to get what was in the back of my truck. As I continue driving on, the snow starts to get a little bit more concerning. I didn't grow up in areas that snow, but I have had a little bit of experience driving in snow, but not enough to know when things get more hazardous. I look out my rear view side window and see a pair of headlights trailing behind me, which is odd because most drivers pass me up. This person is following me. I'm already going well under the speed limit, but I slow down a bit more. He is still not passing me. At some point, I'm getting closer to a larger city. It's still dark, and the snow is still lightly falling. I decide to pull over again, and maybe the car will pass. I quickly exit the freeway, and in front of me is another gas station with a patrol car parked there. I immediately pull up next to the cops and get out. There is a lady officer there, and I start making conversation with her about the snow and expected conditions. I'm thinking about telling her about the car behind me, but all of a sudden, I felt silly about it. What was I going to say? I think I'm being followed by an old man? She is kind of nice, and we're talking for a bit, and she asked me where I'm going and where I came from. She does suggest that I stop for the night, and starts to tell me about the dangers of driving sleepy. I take a look around the area and said yes, I will stop for the night. She tells me that if I go down the road a couple of blocks near the 7-Eleven, there's a motel. I look around and don't see the car anymore, and I decide that I will stop for the night and go to sleep. As I pull up to the motel, I decided to park the truck away from the room I got, and park the truck behind the motel so as not to be seen from the road. I go into my motel room as quickly as I could, lock the door, and honestly didn't get much rest. I watched TV and nodded off here and there, but would awake at every noise. My mind kept racing back to recalling the events from before the California border, to my conversation with the police. Maybe he saw me talking to the cops and decided to take off. Maybe he was waiting for me to pull over at another rest stop and complete his plan, whatever it was. Why would a stranger invite another stranger to his house in the middle of the dead of night at a rest stop? Why did he ask me if I was having problems with my truck? Finally, it's about 7 a.m., and I decided that enough was enough. I get up, check out, have a big breakfast, and continue to my office without anything weird happening. But I always wondered about that night, and why I was being followed. This happened in 1999, Western Australia. I stood as a 19-year-old who was an active volunteer firefighter. I was still working in the town I grew up in, being in rural Western Australia, and I had varied success as an athlete at a state level, but my passion was my involvement in the local volunteer fire and rescue service. I was only 16 when I joined the active ranks after spending the years prior as a junior in their running team, which was a pretty full-on sport. I enjoyed all things firefighting, rescue and emergency and response, and had to have a real calling for it. But as I mentioned above, I did have quite a large sporting influence in my life too. I travelled to a nearby town for a field hockey game, and while there, I caught up with an old mate, Wayne, that I was in the state hockey squad with, and we were really close during that time. A few years back, we both left the state hockey scene and gained employment. We ended up being only about 80 kilometers from each other, but had not realized it until today. After the game, Wade and I naturally gravitated towards each other, and spent the rest of the night at the bar just spending time together and catching up on old times, and really enjoying each other's company. Fast forward to midnight, and the bar was closing up, as it does. We were parked pretty close together by chance, with both our intentions, even though driving whilst being inebriated, to go back to our respective homes. Mine being about 80 kilometers away on an unsealed road, but a pretty straight route, with Wayne going to drive to his home, which was about 175 kilometers away, by taking the standard bypass past my town and then cutting back down a long section of highway on the other side leading to his home, which was a farm. I wish I had a story now of how we had a realization that driving after so much drink was definitely not the best idea after drinking so many beers. But hey, I was about to do the exact same thing, so I didn't feel that I could say anything to this guy, and it was pretty common back then. But please, in no way do I condone or defend it. Don't ever do it. So we leaned on the boot of his red Commodore and talked and laughed as we finished the rest of our last beer. And I remember spending a lot of that time giving him slack about his personalized number plate he had on his car that said Crafty, which was an old nickname because he was quite good at his hockey ball handling skills, which caught many good players by surprise, hence the nickname. With promises of catching up again soon, we both parted ways, and I returned home dodging the rural town cop gauntlet and getting home with no problems a little before 1:30 a.m. I showered and got into bed, and then my phone rang for only a second and then it stopped, which showed a missed call from Wayne. So naturally I thought he may have ended up in my town and wanted to party on. So I tried to call back, but it rang 3 or 4 times before I gave up and went to sleep. I woke up again to the sound of 5 or 6 text messages, one after another, like when you turn your phone back on right after a flight. It was about 2:30 a.m, and they were all from Wayne, but all of them were gibberish and pretty much consisted of random letters and other gibberish. So I tried to call again a few times and messaged him, letting him know that if he were around, he could come and crash at my place. If I needed, I could get the missus up out of bed to collect him, even though we would both be dead for doing so. Again, I got nothing back. It was at 2:19 a.m. that my fire brigade pager sounded, with notification that there was a motor vehicle accident on the bypass to the south of the town, location unknown, but that it was about 2/3 of the distance from the main bypass, and that there was a telecommunications van with a yellow flashing light on site, as he was the one who called it in. I was a little under the weather, so I declined to attend on the first call, but after they sounded the brigade's siren repeatedly and set off the pages again, it was obvious that not an adequate crew had turned out to the station to attend, so I got dressed and got the missus to take me there, which was only a few minutes away. When I arrived, I was the officer in charge, being third in command, with no one higher there, as there were only 4 firefighters, but 5 with me included. So I tasked the group and explained that while I had a few beers earlier, that I would not have turned up if I were unable to perform, and while I would not be driving any appliances, I was comfortable to be OIC, and if anyone had a problem with that, then speak up and I would gladly relinquish command and leave. As I said, we were only 4 guys, and to be honest, none of us had any real idea what was going on, with the longest serving being about 18 months in, and only just finished his induction to firefighting a few months ago. I digress and apologize. So with myself in the passenger seat and 2 others in the main pump, and the other 2 out in front, we made our way to the incident, which was expected to be about 40 minutes away. We intersected and began down the bypass after about 20 minutes, and by now the cold air had sorted me out. I expected to come across not much, perhaps a car rolled over, or not so much damage due to the non-emergency of the call, and the fact that operations had not updated us since turnout. I saw the yellow flashing light long before we made it to the incident, and upon arrival everything changed. It was obvious from the marks on the road leading up to the car that it lost control, and ploughed through a stock fence, and beyond that, there were huge gouges to the paddock with red paint up the side of a small walled dam that I could not see into, but had a guy in a reflective vest on the top of the bank waving a torch. I got out and tasked the 4 others, and then, as part of my 360-degree appraisal, I walked up the bank and met with an old mate in a vest. The guy in the vest was quite frantic and speaking a mile a minute, with huge hand gestures, with his torch flapping about that periodically illuminated a license plate that was partially submerged, but upside down because the car was on its roof, in the middle of the small dam, with only the back wheel's exhaust pipe and license plate visible. "That license plate," said Crafty. "As a first responder, I believe that you activate a certain mode in times of emergency, and your training and natural abilities come to the front, and as such you perform exceptionally well, and it is only later in the shower or at dinner or another time when the past decides to visit you and you're human." Well, I became human right there. I knew it had been at least 2 hours since that car had landed in the dam, because there was frost already over the marks that Wayne's car had made going into the dam. I did walk the perimeter of the dam, looking to see if Wayne had been ejected, but found nothing. I then returned my focus to the almost completely submerged car, and remember clearly saying, "Oh, mate," in the saddest I have ever heard my own voice. A tow truck arrived about the same time, and he indicated he could hitch it onto the skull, dragging it out, and then sort it out on the paddock, but I really felt that was unacceptable. I was a swimming pool manager at the time, and as such a lifeguard, so I felt it best to go in and collect my friend with dignity before the car was recovered. So at about 4 in the morning, in the middle of winter, being about 6 degrees Celsius, I stripped down to my underwear and waded in the dam, and made my way to the sunken car that I really hoped did not have my friend in it, and perhaps it was at least a car thief or something like that. I had an intrinsically safe torch that I remembered being waterproof due to its design in my right hand, with the lanyard tied around my waist, and I steadied myself with my left hand on the car's chassis, and took 8 deep controlled breaths and dove under to where I assumed the driver door was. I had a really hard time locating anything, as just the fact that the car was upside down really throws your perception of where things are, like door handles and such, and the driver's window was still intact, which was not fantastic. I came up for air and then went again, and was able to find the door handle and get the door open, which was lucky considering I thought the mud would stop it. I put my back to the pillar and used my legs to open the door as much as I could, which was actually quite a long way. I then went back up for air and had to give myself a few minutes to get my breathing sorted as it was so cold. I ducked back down again, and I had to literally hold my torch to the temple of my head so I could only see perhaps 15 or 20 centimeters in front of me, and I entered the driver door. I cannot instill the absolute horror and panic that a man feels when 15 centimeters from his face, a white, dead face of a friend appears, with eyes slightly open and a mouth that was deformed from a broken jaw. I reacted by jumping out of my skin, and I hit my head really hard on the roof. It was just then I felt an absolute calmness, and I knew it was just a task, and that somehow I felt Wayne calling me a chicken for flinching. I felt and put my left arm over his dangling arms, and tried to locate his seatbelt, as he was still strapped in upside down, and I was having some major difficulties locating it in the dark. I went back up to the surface and had to catch my breath, and upon my return I continued searching for the buckle, and when I finally found it, I could not release the seatbelt. It didn't matter how much I pushed the button, or how much I pulled on it wouldn't release. I was running short on air, but did not want to go up to get air because I knew I might have difficulty locating the seatbelt buckle again, and I thought that it was so close that only 1 or 2 more seconds and it would come free. While my prayers were finally answered, I got the buckle to release, to which I tried to return to the surface to get air, and then returned for the body. However, when I tried to push back and out the car door to the surface, I felt my right wrist snag on something in the car. While I tried to just break the lanyard, it was too strong, and my frantic tugging only made the torch flap about, illuminating sections of a dashboard and Wayne's upper legs and bare stomach, which made me freak out even more. I was already short on air, and now I was doing that gulping action that everyone has done when they hold their breath a little too long, and was getting really scared. It was then that I just stopped, not because of anything profound or an incident. I just really stopped and did nothing. It felt as though I wasn't gasping or dying for air anymore, and I calmly thought to direct the torch to whatever was snagging to calmly free it and let myself go. When I grabbed the torch, I pointed it at my wrist with my left hand and saw that my lanyard had become stuck around the unclasped buckle of the seatbelt that I had undone. I knew exactly where the issue was, and I tried to unloosen it from the buckle, and I really couldn't do it. It was like a warmth coming over me for a few seconds, the fear returning to me, that I was still trapped. It was then that time stood still, and with the untamed torch flapping about, because I was still concentrating on the snag, that I just stopped as the torch illuminated Wayne's face, and he was just looking right into my soul, with normal open eyes and a slight smile on his face. It's as if Wayne said, "It's okay, you're a useless mug, because you don't have to worry about it, and I've got your back. Let me sort it out and get you out of trouble as usual." It was then that Wayne's hand moved purposefully and unhooked the caught lanyard, and just for lack of a better word, left. After surfacing and coughing while regaining my lungs, I looked to the damn bank, and the other firefighters were screaming and pointing. One of them was right there in the water with me in such a frantic state. After I collected Wayne and took him to the dam bank, I put him in an ambulance, and I started to resolve the scene and talk to the guys, and I was made aware of their side of the story. While I had gone under and surfaced a few times, I apparently went under, and as time went by, the guys got increasingly worried when I did not resurface. I explained about my lanyard getting stuck, and that I had to get it free. But I left out my experience with Wayne. However, the guys would not let it go. Apparently, I was underwater for over 15 minutes, and after only around 1 minute, one of the guys stripped off and dove in with me. He tells me to this day that he got hold of my legs and with both feet on the car could not budge me. He even explained that he dove down many times to feel and see where I was trapped to free me, but could never find anything holding me there, and he swears he ran his fingers down both my arms, seeing as they were the two things he thought that could be caught. I woke up every morning at 2:19 a.m. for months after that, until Wayne visited me again and told me that it was not my fault and to forgive myself. I've never woken up at 2:19 a.m. again. Every day, I miss my friend. I love you, Wayne. I am a 17-year-old girl. My neighborhood is located in a small town, so we all know each other here. When I was 15, I was walking by a park near my house when a guy I've never seen before approached me and started making small talk with me. As an anxious person, small talk is an enemy, so I was already feeling uncomfortable, but still being polite and nice to him because I don't really know how to be rude to strangers. As we walk, he tells me his name is Mark, and he says that he lives a street away from my house. I tell him my name, and after some trivial questions about the day and stuff, he asks me, "Did you used to have purple hair? That looked really good on you." That was when I was 13. I remind you I don't know him, I've never seen him before. How the hell did he know and remember that? Whatever, I brushed it off. But every time he asked something about me, it gave me the impression that he was trying to get info out of me. I said goodbye to him after a few more words, as I had to catch the bus to school, and went away. A few weeks later, as I'm leaving my house to go to the bus stop, I see Mark walking from where he told me his house was to the stop as well. I start walking, and he slows his walk to approach me. I think, there's no way out of this. I have to speak to him now. He started making conversation with me, and I kept my answers short, mostly because I still felt uncomfortable with his too personal questions, but he still played the nice guy. I didn't get verbal, but I started dropping hints about me being awkward, like putting on my headphones again or stopping to search something in my backpack. Nothing could stop him from talking to me. When we got to the bus stop, 3 buses were coming and he asked me which one I was going to take. I told him, and he got on the same bus as me. Once on the bus, all of the individual seats were taken, so I had to sit on a double one. He sat next to me and still talked to me. He told me he was 23, that he's in college, and it's one that's near my school. Great. He spoke to me the whole trip, and when I got up off the seat to leave the bus, he also stood up and said to me that his stop was on the other side, but he wanted to walk with me. I wanted to die at this point. This happened multiple times. Once at the end of the semester, I hadn't slept in 35 hours because I had a huge test that morning. I was reading my notes and texts at the time, but then Mark appears at the bus stop out of nowhere. I didn't have the energy to speak to him, so I tried to pretend I hadn't seen him and kept reading. Obviously that didn't work, and he began speaking to me. I told him I was studying for a big test and that I hadn't slept in a long time, and I thought that out of respect that would keep him quiet. But guess what? It didn't. He started asking me about my grades, my tests, and I barely answered, but still was polite. And whenever I tried starting reading my notes again, he would keep talking. I had to change my routine and take the next bus so that I wouldn't meet Mark. That would mean, though, I'd be 10 minutes late to every class, but I didn't care. I just didn't want to see him. I spoke to my mum about this, and she knew the guy only from seeing him around the neighborhood, and she thought he's only a little intense, and that my anxiety was making me overthink about him. But I had a gut feeling. I didn't like him. I told my mum's friend, as she lives across the street and has been here a good 35 years, and she knew Mark since he was a baby. She told me that he's a good guy, but he doesn't speak to anyone, except me. I saw him around a few times, but whenever I saw him, I did whatever I could to avoid him. Sometimes I could escape, other times he would approach me. Fast forward to mid-last month. There had been multiple house robberies in the zone, so the neighbors decided to make a WhatsApp group chat so they could let each other know if something was wrong in the neighborhood, and alarms were installed in all of the houses. I'm not in the group, but my mum is, and so's Mark. When the group was made, everyone introduced themselves with their addresses. My mum doesn't have a profile picture of herself on WhatsApp, and a few weeks ago I went to my dad's house, and when I got home from the day, my mum told me that she woke up at 2 a.m. with 3 missed calls from Mark. She tried to call him, he picked up but he didn't speak. Just listened. My mum said, "Hello?" and he hung up. It gave me goosebumps when she told me that. I always knew there was something about him that was off, but this is just too much. I told her I find him more and more terrifying with time, and she told me she'd keep an eye on him. Yesterday, my mum handed me her phone for me to send myself a picture. She was sitting right beside me and could see what I was doing. I quickly saw 2 unread messages from Mark asking her something about the neighborhood alarm. The messages were about 6 hours old, and since I told her before that Mark repulses and scares me, she didn't tell me he'd talk to her. She saw me seeing that and got a little nervous, but I pretended I didn't see it. Why, of all 40 neighbors in the group chat, did he speak to my mum? I really didn't want to know about this. Should I consider him a stalker or just a weirdo? What should I do? No matter what though, I do hope to not bump into him again. I worked on a mine in Australia, on the west coast, back in 2009. The Mine Emergency Response Term, ERT, was called to an incident, being some fishermen washed off a popular fishing rock nearby called Garth's Rock. Luckily we had a ship in port, and as such, had 3 tugboats in the vicinity, and they were able to respond to the people in the water before our arrival at the port, which is about a 20-minute drive from the main site. We arrived, and needed to reverse the ambulance about 150 meters down the jetty, as it was only 1 lane, and to leave without having to back up was a bit of a priority. Myself, as the officer in charge, and 3 other medics grabbed our first response gear and some extra thermal blankets, then made our way down to a lower boat landing and were given flotation devices before we were allowed to board the tug, and after doing so, we were ushered to the port side gallery door, where inside, 3 casualties were resting after being pulled from the ocean after about 2 hours of floating around. Due to the tight confines of the galley, the 2 tug workers that were inside doing their best to look after them had to leave to accommodate my team, and they both left out the starboard gallery door and remained outside, as did 3 to 4 other tug workers on the port side, with a few others on other parts of the boat. When we entered, it took a while to adjust to the light. There were 2 tables on my right up against the wall that has a bench seat on either side that you have to slide into with a table in the middle, which is all bolted in place. In front of these 2 booths was a small gap that you could use to walk the length of the room, and either enter one of the seats or leave by the port or starboard doors. I assessed that there were 3 people in the room. 2 of them were on the ground, one immediately in front of me laying on his side, and the other on his back halfway down the gap, where you walk and both were middle-aged men, with many obvious cuts and scrapes from attempting to climb rocks back up the reef and get to land unsuccessfully. The third casualty, however, was an older man who was sitting at the far gallery table with his hands clasped in front of him, elbows on the table and a 1,000-yard stare, even though looking at him he had as many clear injuries such as cuts and so forth, with most obviously needing further care, such as stitches, and a lot of blood had oozed out and congealed over the table, with his hands just clasped together with his elbows on the table. I directed the other medics, as appropriate, during my triage, being one to each of the prone casualties, and myself and another medic attended to old mate just sitting there. We were made aware by one of the other medics dealing with one of the other guys on the floor that this was his dad, and he was earlier very, very upset that he had entered the water after his mate was washed in, and apparently he kept on going on and repeated the same thing over and over, about having to bloody save his son, and only went quiet a few minutes before our arrival. After several attempts, the old mate showed no understanding or interest in communication with myself or my partner, so between us we just decided that shock and or hypothermia were probably a factor, and attempted to first put a thermal blanket on him, while at the same time I would try to take some primary vitals and see if there was any obvious life-threatening bleeding above or under the table. Then it went pear-shaped. This guy looked my other medic in the eyes and said, "You can't resolve this. You are just occupying my presence. You need to let me keep going." I looked at my partner the same way we have many times before we have come across a hysterical or incoherent casualty. But this bloke was so calm and unwavering, with interlaced fingers and a deadpan voice, that we just stared at each other, waiting for the other to take charge, which is quite common in these circumstances. After a few seconds, I found composure and informed him that he had encountered a spot of mischief, and we needed to assess and fix his wounds, and that soon we would be at the hospital, and all would be progressing from there, and that he could relax. Well, the old mate, quick as a wicket, stood upright, and the table broke free of its base and hit me pretty hard on the right leg. Now, I don't mean the table was rotten or crappy, it was just poorly fastened to the floor. I mean, the tabletop made an audible splinter from where I saw him standing up, with the force concentrated on his two front thighs, and actually broke it loose, pushing it into me and against the back of the seat. My medic mate, being so crammed in a tight area of the gallery, later told me that he put out his left hand to the casualty and his right hand to the tabletop to grab it and stabilize it. The old mate was very quick and pushed past my mate medic and went out the starboard galley door like the wind. I pushed the table forward on the bench top, and both myself and mate medic followed, probably only your second or two behind. But a search of the deck and a run up the stairs proved nothing in finding him, and no one outside the gallery saw anything except myself and my partner. There are stairs that led to the wheelhouse, and up there were 6 or 7 higher-ups from the mining company, and none of them saw anyone but us climbing the stairs in a frantic fit, looking for him. Upon returning to the gallery, the guy who handed us inflation devices before boarding was still manning the dock, and he said no one had passed him. The captain of the tug was behind the controls the whole time, because he was required to keep the nose of the tug against the dock, and 3 other deckhands were all outside the doors, port and starboard, all of which provided a 360-degree view of the lower deck, and all said they did not see anyone leave after we medics entered the gallery. We returned to the gallery, and despite being weirded out, the other 2 casualties were treated, and transferred off-site to the hospital. In the debrief, it was only myself, my partner, and one of the other two medics that verified that the older guy was in the room, as the other medic involved had no recollection, but thinks she just was too involved in her own case, and the tugboat crew reported stating 2 people pulled from the water, and that there was no third casualty. I tried to talk to the casualties in the hospital afterwards to try and get some answers, and find out if they saw him, or if indeed the old mate was one of their fathers. But after 2 consecutive days, my shifts ended, and I had the day before beginning night shift to go to the hospital, and they'd both been discharged. My brother-in-law works at the hospital, and he says that nothing was untowards about them, except that one of the guy was all, "I'm so happy to be alive," while the other guy didn't do much else than sit silently, looking out the window and not eating anything. To this day I still have no idea what the hell happened, but, as is usual, only myself and mate medic speak about it occasionally when we're drunk, and that's all we can do. Back in the late 90s, my best friend was getting married. As her maid of honor, it was my job to throw her a bachelorette party. Instead of the regular humdrum get liquored up and see naked men party, I decided to do something a little different. Not to mention, she was the only one who was 18 at the time, so there weren't many party options. The company my dad worked for at the time owned land that they had a ranch on, complete with cows, and out in the middle of nowhere. I had been there with my family on quite a few occasions, and I loved it out there. I decided that we should go out there, have a bonfire, maybe drink a little, and since we both loved it, we could fish in the lake that the mines had dug up. That was the plan anyway. I told Renee about my plan for her party, and she seemed to think that it was a fun idea, since we didn't truly want to hang out with a bunch of people anyway. She was going to bring her cousin April, and I was going to bring my niece Tony. We had spent the past 2 years hanging out all the time anyway, and had grown quite close. When I say niece, I know some of you will automatically think she was about 4 years old, but she was only 2 years younger than I. Since we all still lived with our parents, we had to come up with something better than, "Hey guys, we're gonna go hang out in the middle of nowhere and have a bonfire on a piece of property that may or may not be safe for 4 teenage girls." So we said we were going bowling. I was driving an old Chevy truck, and Renee was driving a Mustang, which, by that time, was already 8 years old. At about 6 p.m., Renee and April showed up at my house, and we loaded up my truck and got on the road. Tony riding with me, and Renee and April in her car. I'm still thankful that Renee chose to drive her car and follow me, instead of riding with me. We drove for about 45 minutes, slowly watching the town become nothing but trees and fields on both sides. A herd of cows, or an orange grove here and there. We lived in Florida, so everything was flat, and you could see for miles. The sun started disappearing, and finally it was completely dark. I got to the end of a very long highway, and I took a right. I couldn't remember the name of the dirt road I was supposed to turn on, but I knew I would recognize it when I saw it. And I did. That is when it gets weird. The minute I turned on the dirt road that led to the ranch, I saw smoke. Being February in Florida, I just thought it was dry dirt surrounding me. No such luck. The truck was smoking underneath the hood. I stopped and got out and popped the hood. Sure enough, there was a small fire. I can't tell you what started it, but I can tell you that it was burning. It may have been wires or hoses or just whatever. I'm not an under-the-hood kind of person. Renee and April pulled up behind me and came up to see what was wrong. The 4 of us were throwing dirt on the fire, and we finally got it put out and Renee pulled her car in front of my truck to face it with the headlights on. We still couldn't really see anything, so we just stood there trying to figure out what to do. We finally decided to pile into Renee's car and find a gas station to get some water, because that's what you do when there's a fire. You look for water. We drove for a good 20 minutes before we saw the bright lights of a gas station. We pulled in, and we couldn't believe how bright this thing was. For being out in the middle of nowhere, it lit up like the 4th of July. We all walk in and head straight for the cooler and find water. All 4 of us grab a gallon of water and then find some grub for ourselves. We went to the counter, and there's a woman working there. I remember thinking how pretty she was. She had light blonde hair and clear, deep blue eyes. Man, she's too pretty to be working at night at a gas station in the middle of nowhere, I thought. When we put all 4 gallons of water on the counter, she asked what we needed with all the water. Renee told her, and she said, "Hang on a sec, my husband's a mechanic. I'll call him and see what he says." Convenient, huh? She pulled out her telephone from under the counter. It was an old rotary-style phone, which seemed weird to me at the time. So she called him, and he said that as long as the fire was out, go ahead and fill it up with water, and he was sure it would start. Now as I'm saying this, I'm wondering how he was sure that it would start. We didn't even know what was under the hood that was on fire to be able to tell him, nor did he know how bad the fire was. He also said that if it didn't start, to come back to the store and have his wife call him, and he would meet us out to where we were and fix it. We thanked the cashier and left. When we got back in the car, we felt a little better and started talking. Renee said she loved the black and white checkered gas pump. She said they almost looked like cows. I asked what she was talking about. She said, the gas station, the one we were at. No, they were green. The whole place was green and white. April and Tony thought we were both crazy, as April had seen red and Tony had seen blue. We got really quiet again, and finally Tony asked what the woman looked like. I gave them my version, adding that she was some tall model. Renee had seen dark brown hair. Tony had seen dirty blonde, and said the girl was short. I can't remember what April said, but hers was also different. We argued, and just finally let it go. We got back to the truck, added water until it was overflowing, got inside, and it started right up, with no hesitation at all. We were all so happy because now, as long as we got home without anything terrible happening, none of our parents would ever know what had happened. As for the truck, I thought I'd just tell my dad that there was a fire at the bowling alley, but I was able to limp the truck home. On the way home, there was a car behind me the entire time, so of course I thought it was Renee and April. This was before everyone had cell phones, so we weren't calling to make sure. Finally we get home, and pull into my yard and park the truck. Tony and I had been pretty quiet on the way home, partially because we were trying to make sense of what happened at the gas station, and partially because we were praying the truck would get us home. I expected Renee to pull in right behind me, but she didn't. Tony and I decided she must have stopped the gas, so we waited a little while for her to arrive. Finally, after 20 minutes, she pulled up, and she was angry. "Why are you so mad?" I asked her. "Because you left us and we got lost," she yelled. "But you weren't behind us the entire time?" I yelled back now, also annoyed. "Renee, when we pulled off the dirt road, you were behind us. There was no other traffic out there. You turned with us back onto the highway. I saw you. I was literally a straight shot from there. How could you have gotten lost?" "I don't know. I followed you off the dirt road and I turned left when you did, and then I saw you turn onto another road." "I never turned onto another road until I turned onto this street. I said. She just looked at me like I was crazy, and we decided to tell my parents we were back and that we were going to Denny's. We were hungry, and we thought that maybe we could find a booth and talk this out over there. When we got to Denny's, we ordered some food and started talking. "Where did you end up when you saw us turn off the highway?" asked Tony. "I don't know where it was," said Renee in her shaky voice. "We ended up at this store/bar thing, and since it was the only thing we had seen for miles, we had to go in and ask for directions." Renee and April had gone into the store, practically hanging onto each other. They said that when they walked in, everyone turned to stare. The place got dead quiet, and they both got more scared than they had ever been. Renee said that she went up to a counter and asked the woman behind it how to get back to our town. Renee and April said the woman laughed and said that she was a long way from home. They both said her laugh and the general atmosphere of the place made them feel like this was somewhere they should have never been, and they should have never have known about. Just not a good vibe altogether. However, she told them how to get back, and they pretty much ran into the car as fast as they could and left. The four of us sat in the back of the booth for a few hours, going over what happened that night. How we couldn't agree on what the woman looked like. How we couldn't agree on what the store looked like. How we couldn't even agree on the size of the inside of the store or how it was set up. We were retracing our steps from the moment we walked in. Okay, there was a display of chips on the right as you walk in, a set of coolers on the side and the back wall. The counter was on the left, and it was kind of on a pedestal, so the cashier stood way taller than the rest of us. Needless to say, nobody agreed with that. Everyone had their own version of what the store looked like. Now I know that we all walked into the store. I know that we all spoke to that woman, and our story should not have differed so dramatically. Finally, we decided to call it a night and headed home. The next morning I went out to check the damage on the truck. I popped the hood with the other three girls standing right next to me, and since we had just ended up staying the night together, we were in shock. The truck looked fine, the wires looked fine, there was nothing charred or even black, no holes in the hose, nothing. It looked like there had never been a fire at all. Fast forward 6 years later, Renee and I were talking about the events of the day, and just on a whim we decided to drive out there and have a look. After I showed her the gate that led to the ranch, she said, "Let's go find the gas station again." I agreed, and we drove up and down that road for so long. No matter how far we drove, we couldn't find anywhere a gas station, or where it could have been. There was nothing. It was like it never existed. The only store I ever remember being out there was a small grocery store that I always thought looked like a log cabin. My family would go to this store when we were at the ranch if something came up and we needed food or girly supplies. I knew right there where the store was, but it was not the only one we had gone to that night. I asked Renee if she could remember the name of the store, and she said it was Pioneer Gas. I came home that day and googled it, and finally found a company called Pioneer Gas that was based in Alaska, nowhere near Florida, and asked my dad, brother, and both of my sisters if they remember any other stores aside from the log cabin grocery store, and they all said no. Tony passed away in 2007, and April got into Jesus so much that she had no contact with anyone that's not a part of her church right now. So it's just me and Renee who truly know what happened that night. I'm a 16-year-old girl who has no common sense. In my 16 years on this earth, I've barely left my hometown. My family doesn't really do holidays, and I've only ever left the UK once, and that was a school trip to France. But you see, this has left me with a yearn for adventure that has never been quenched. So around the time of my 15th birthday, I decided that I was going to start travelling on my own, without the knowledge of my parents, by train. Until the other day, I had only gone to towns and places less than an hour away. But you see, last Saturday was the big one. I had been planning it for weeks. I was going to wake up and catch an early train somewhere 4 hours away. And that's what I did. I told my parents the perfect alibi, and they wouldn't expect me back till late. I caught the 5:20 train that morning and went on a nice big adventure. It was amazing. I loved it. And then it was time for me to go home. I arrived back at the station and waited for my train. In the corner of my eye, I noticed a man looking at me. I felt uneasy. I quickly pushed this feeling back to the side, worrying that I was just being judgmental. After all, he had that kind of look about him. My train pulled up, and I jumped on ready for the first hour and first train of my 4-hour journey back. Initially, I sat down in a single seat with no window near it. I had a quick debate in my head over if it was worth moving and finally deciding it was, and I got up and went into the next carriage to sit down in a 2x1 seat just behind a 2x2, the ones with the tables, which had a young couple and their 4-year-old in it. On the other side of the walkway was another 2x1 and 2x2 seat, all of which had people occupying them. By the time I had actually gotten up, everyone else was seated and the train was about to depart. So when someone then walked through the doors I had just come through, I found it strange, but not enough to bother to turn around to see who it was. Whoever this mystery person was, they just carried on up further up the carriage after realizing there was no space here. 2 stops passed and nothing really happened. The 4-year-old in front stated she was thirsty, and the parents realized they had no water left. I was going to offer her some of mine, but I felt that it would make me look like I had been listening to their conversation the whole time. When the train pulls into the next station, the people to the side of me all get off the train, leaving the seats empty. The 2x1 seats are quickly taken up by a man who has clearly just gotten on the train. And once the doors close, the 2x2s are taken up by one guy on his own, who looks very familiar. Was it the guy from the station? No, it can't be. I'm just paranoid. But he keeps trying to stare at me. He keeps looking at me, and it's making me all kinds of uncomfortable. I try meeting his gaze, hoping that he'll soon stop, but it didn't work. He still kept looking at me. Then I notice, that's when he's not looking at me, that he's watching this little girl. The parents haven't noticed, and I'm confident I'm safe because there's a couple in front, right? But that makes no sense. The little girl says she's thirsty again, and so the dad gets up to go see if he can find some water on the train. When he returns, he mutters something about their only being able to get water from the bathroom taps, but that's not a good idea, and he really doesn't want to do that. At this point I decide I probably should just give them mine. After all, I can probably last longer than a 4-year-old without water. So I offer the dad my water, and he gladly accepts it, asking me if I'm sure, before pouring some of mine into his daughter's cup. I say it's fine, and I get that good happy feeling in my stomach over helping someone else. However, this feeling is quickly replaced with dread, as I see the strange man opposite, sticking his thumb up, as if to say well done to me. It was such a small gesture that freaked me out so much. My brain started working overtime with its paranoia. I'm now 3.5 hours away from home, on my own, and my parents don't even know I'm here. How stupid could I be? If I get back, I'm never leaving the house again. Did I not listen to all those horror stories from the media? Did I not realize what happens to girls out on their own? I had to get myself to snap out of it. I had to make a plan. Getting worked up and paranoid wasn't going to help anyone. The way I saw it, I had 2 options. Get off at the next station and hope that he doesn't follow me, although at this point I was convinced that he was the person who walked past me earlier. Or 2, move carriage again and try to find the staff. I could just sit near them, and if he follows me I could let them know about the situation so that they could assist me. I decided 2 was my best option, but I'd wait until the train arrived at the next station and head back through the doors to the carriage that I was originally on, in hopes that it looked like I was getting off. The wait. The amount of time it took for the train to get to the next station honestly felt like a lifetime, and the man kept looking at me. When the train finally did stop, I moved quicker than I'd ever moved in my whole life as I got through the doors and sat as far away from them as I could. But it turned out that my original carriage was the last one, at the back of the train where the staff were not. If I wanted to get to the staff, I would have to walk past the man again, and I definitely didn't want to do that. So I just sat and waited for my stop. Thankfully, this carriage was a lot louder and busier. The noise was comforting, so I played my music on full blast, just making sure it couldn't be heard outside my headphones because I'm not a monster. And just let myself cry a little. Every train I got after that, I made sure to sit right by the staff, but I never felt safe until I was finally home in my dad's arms. I never knew a hug could make me feel so safe. I have this neighbor that lives across the street from me. He doesn't live alone. He lives with his parents. Let's call him Drew. My parents tell me that Drew has mental issues, and when he acts crazy, I should stay away from him. I have a conversation with him, and he seems normal when he's on medication. One time, Drew stabs his grandfather to death when I was young. He was arrested at first, until his family told him that he had mental issues before he was arrested. The judge ordered Drew to be evaluated at the mental hospital until he's no longer a threat to himself and others. Drew moved back to his parents' house after that. I forgot to mention that he's off his medication. He would start to yell and sing at random times. Another time, things happened when I was 14 and in my room. To clarify, my window from my room shows his house, and I heard yelling from across the street. So I look out my window. It was him. He had a knife and was yelling gibberish to drivers trying to break in. Drew targeted people who drove on the road. Drivers swerved to get out the way and drove fast down the road, but they were all terrified. I was frozen in fear and didn't do anything about it except watch it go down. One driver contacted 911. The neighbor ran out the house when he heard the sirens, and Drew locked himself inside and refused anyone entry. Police and a SWAT team entered and told me to stay indoors until it was peaceful. The crazy neighbor stayed locked in for 8 hours until he gave himself up to the authorities. He was taken again to the mental hospital and again released back to his parents' house. The mother moved out because she was too frightened of him. She found his writings about him wanting to end her, and she divorced her husband after he refused to get him into a mental hospital. He didn't find any of the writing about him, so that's probably why. The last time was last year. Drew broke into his next-door neighbor's house, and he waited for them to come home. He had a machete with him. His mother saw him breaking into the house from the window and called the police. He was taken away. His father told my parents that he would be at the mental hospital for life. When my parents asked why, he refused to tell them. To Drew, please, be better. This happened a couple of summers ago when I was in the 7th grade. Me and a few friends were just hanging out at Long Beach in Gloucester, just playing with an aluminium bat and tennis balls. We got bored of just playing normal wiffle bat, so we decided to go do a home run derby. We decided to do it near the big stone wall that separates the beach houses and the beach. We said that if the ball goes over the wall, it's a home run. This works out fine for a bit, but we had to keep running up the stairs to get the ball out of people's lawns. I went up and got yelled at by some guy, so we looked for somewhere else to play. There's a large motor inn at the end of the beach that has many balconies, so we played there. Now, this is where things start to take a turn for the worst. We were hitting the ball towards the motor inn. We did this for a solid 20 minutes, until, of course, I hit the old man reading on his balcony. He yells and says he's going to get the manager. Us, being stupid, wait there, and then the manager comes and tells us that we can't play there. Here's where the beach creep comes in. This man, who's probably in his late 40s in a polo and scally cap, walks over to us and tells us that the manager is an arse. We agreed, just assuming he's trying to be nice or whatever. Then he takes the bat out of my friend's hand. Luckily, I had brought my bat too, so I could hold it the whole time. Before I continue, my parents were at the complete other side of the beach, so they could not see any of this. The man then hits my friend's ass with the bat. Clearly uncomfortable, my friend says he's going to go for a walk. He didn't go to our parents because he wanted to see what was going to happen next. The man still holding the bat says that there is another good spot to hit home runs. The man then repeatedly says, "I just want to hit a home run over and over," and then says, "Oh, I thought we were at the other beach. How about I drive you guys there so we can play?" We all say no thanks and that we want to swim. He then grabs the collar of my friend's shirt and says, "You're coming with me." We were all shocked as he started dragging my friend away. That was when I realized what I had to do. I went up to the guy and said, "I'll go with you." "Really?" He responded with a grin that still makes me terrified to this day, and I say, "Yeah," then hit him with my bat as hard as I could. He goes down instantly, and my friends start crying. We run back to our parents and try to call 911, and by the time they got there, he was gone. We left right away, and now whenever I go back there, my friend always jokes about how I saved his life. I would rather not meet that guy again. Around 8 years ago, I was on vacation with my parents and my cousin. My sister couldn't come, as she had just started her first job, so she stayed home by herself. When we were children, both my sister and I used to be really close, mainly because we shared a room for the first 7 to 9 years. We used to have our code, with taps, for asking things like, "Are you asleep? Are they?" and stuff like that. She's also always doing something or looking for something to do, always being the first up. So when she was up and wanted me to wake up, she would place her face as close to mine as possible and stare at me. I don't know for how long she would stay like that for, but I can clearly remember multiple times waking to her doing this. I, of course, would shout or at least panic until realizing it was her. I guess it was fun for her, and I have to admit, I also did it a few times. So now we are on our trip, and it's been at least 10 to 12 years since the last time my sister pulled this prank on me. My sister and I are not as close as we used to be. We have constantly grown apart a little, but we still love each other. It was the last night in our trip before heading back to our city, and we just had to find this nice hotel close to the pyramids in Palenque, which meant no cell phone service. We were sharing a room, my mum and dad in the first bed and my cousin and I in the other one. At some point around 4 a.m, I woke up to feel the same old sensation of someone staring at me, so I opened my eyes and can clearly see a face. My immediate reaction was to shout, waking up my mother. I have to say that this sensation by itself is really scary, but years of experience with my sister waking me up like this took the threat away. So despite of my shouting, I wasn't scared. I was just too familiar. My mum turned on the light and asked me what happened. I told her that I was pretty sure my sister had just woken me up. I know it didn't make any sense, but I felt it was her, although I can't say I saw her face. I just saw a face and it disappeared. Immediately. My mum is really superstitious, so she just couldn't sleep after that, because she felt something was really odd, and I couldn't sleep thinking it was my sister. Later that day in the morning, we noticed we all had a lot of missed calls. My sister was involved in a really bad car accident. Luckily, she only had minor injuries, and to this day, I don't know what to make out of this experience. My brain tells me it was just a coincidence, but on the other hand, it's the only way I would have thought of my sister sleeping. It was just so real in between both of us. As an extra, on our previous visit to Palenque, my parents, my sister and I at the ruins, we heard drums. My parents said that it was raining, and that we were playing with the ponds, and that at some point the drums started playing. Out of curiosity, we followed the sound, getting us deeper into the jungle. I can't remember why we stopped, but when we finally made it to the exit and asked the security guard about the music, he said, "So you heard the drums as well?" He then proceeds to tell us that a lot of people have heard them at different times, and they don't know the source of it. I was laying in bed when I was about 12 years old. I was on the verge of falling asleep when I heard what sounded like a box dropping onto hardwood floor. I thought nothing of it, because this has happened to me before while on the verge of falling asleep. The second time I heard it, I knew it was real, because I was wide awake. About 3 seconds later, my burglar alarm went off. I shot out of bed and ran into my mum's room and waited in the closet for the police to arrive. When they showed up, we all went downstairs and our jaws dropped. Every single cabinet in the kitchen was open. Every plate, every glass, every bowl smashed into a million pieces on the ground. We thought of it as a breaking and entering, and so did the cops, until my mother realized that every door and window was still locked, and there was no sign of a break-in. You'd also think that we would have heard all the glass and smashing downstairs, but my mother turned off the burglar alarm about 50 to 20 seconds after it went off, and we heard nothing but silence. The police concluded that there were no signs of a break-in, and we had basically to go about our normal lives pretending this didn't happen. My mum put the house up for sale 4 sleepless months later. I have experienced ghosts pretty much my entire life. Let's start from the beginning. From the first day we moved in, my husband went to work, and I stayed home to unpack. We have a guest room right next to our room. Within an hour, my cat started growling at the room, and my dog was growling and barking. I grabbed a pair of scissors and threw the door open, expecting to see someone in there, but it was empty. My mum always said, when things like that happen, I need to say, in the name of Jesus Christ, you are not welcome here, and you need to leave. That was the first time I ever said that. Ghosts haven't been a big problem for me growing up, so I could ignore most of it. But we just moved in, so I didn't want that to happen at all. I'm guessing that made things worse. I have an intense fear of windows at night. I don't know why, but I always have. So I had to buy curtains for our front door, back door, and kitchen window and rooms. The first incident happened at night. I was checking Facebook and looked up for a moment. It looked like someone was standing outside my house. I went back to Twitter, deciding it was probably a tree. When I was ready to go to bed, I sat up and saw a black shadow at the foot of my bed that slowly disappeared. After that, it was normal creaks and footsteps and things vanishing. I need to mention that for a few months, our cat had refused to sleep in our room at night. She will always sleep in the guest room, as it is her own bedroom. A week ago, my friend came over and brought her dog. She had her dog on her lap, and almost instantly her dog looked at the corner of my living room and started growling. Since then, I have been super uncomfortable. That same night, I put my smartphone on the end of the table. My side of the bed is right next to the bedroom door, and I caught a glimpse of what looked like the bottom of a white dress passing by. I jumped and slept under the covers that night. I call my grandma weekly since my mum died in December. While I was on the phone with her talking about my mum, I saw what looked like a shadow figure pass by our guest bedroom, which used to be hers. The animals stayed well away that day. The weirdest one that happened to me a while ago. I'm a night owl, so I'm always up until morning. I was watching TV, just normal reruns, and I was laying down on the couch which sat below our window until we rearranged it. I sat up and instantly felt dread and panic and fear. I thought I was in danger. I jumped off the couch and turned around. I had sat up and was right in front of an open space in the curtains, where anyone could look inside the house. As I said, I have an irrational fear of windows at night. No one could explain why that scared me so much, because I had no idea until I turned around. That brings us to today's incident. In between has been small stuff, as I said before. What happened was when I fed my cat dinner, she jumped off the desk where she eats. She looked at the bedroom and jumped as if something was terrifying her. She kept watching the bedroom and carefully walked under our entertainment center, over to the bedroom, and I tried to blame our fan, but she's never been afraid of it before. I followed her with my camera, switching between my bedroom door and hers, and she still carefully walked into the room and is still under my bed. My dog is acting like things are normal, but she's been with me for 8 years, so perhaps she's just used to it. When I was very young, my parents and I were on vacation at our beach house, and I had a dream of my mother's friend. Her name was Jill, and she told me to tell my mother that she was finally happy. So the next morning during breakfast, I told my mum what this woman, who I never met, told me, and my mum immediately shot up and dialed a phone number on her phone. She later told me that her friend Jill was in hospital, and that the person on her phone had told her that Jill had passed away in the night I had a dream. Also, in my freshman year of college, I had a dream about my dad getting into a car accident, and that morning I called my mum to make sure everything was okay. She said everything was fine and that I had nothing to worry about. Later that day, she called me and told me that my dad had gotten into a car accident. Nothing major, but the car was a bit ruined, and she was floored by what I had seen in my dream. About the time I was 17 or so, a few friends and I were out at the beach making dry ice bombs in the middle of the night. This was probably around midnight or so, as we were quite delinquent back then. There were about 5 or 6 of us, and we were just chilling, having a good time, trying to make potholes in the ground with dry ice bombs in the sand. It was quite a foggy night, which isn't too unusual considering I live in Oregon on the northwest coast, and it rains here 300 days out of the year. After 30 minutes or so of being rambunctious teenagers, we decided to walk down the beach a bit. After about 15 minutes of walking, we hear a strange scratching grinding sound and stop and listen. Sooner than 20 seconds later, a tall figure emerges out of the fog adjacent to the ocean, but between us and the ocean. This guy had to be at least 8 foot tall, and it was dragging a chain. Not your average chain, but a massive chain that looked like it had been used for an anchor or something. The rings were probably at least 8 to 12 inches apiece, and it looked like they had to be at least an inch in diameter too. Now this chain wasn't short by any means. It was probably 40 to 50 feet long, and this dude was just dragging it in the sand behind him in the middle of the night. We all sat there silently, and I got the biggest shiver down my spine, and all my hair stood up on end, and my breath seemed to escape me. We gathered watching the figure cross our path and make its way up the beach, and the chains slowly faded out of sight. Well, that was creepy as hell, I thought. We then continued back down the beach to a shipwreck called the Peter Iredale, which is all about but eroded now, and took to the cool sea spray to enjoy the ominous swooshing of the serene ocean waves. We toss a few dry ice bombs into the water and head back to our car, where we parked probably half a mile up the shore. As we're walking, we hear the noise again. My heart thumps, and I get cold sweats. It was that thing, trudging the goddamn chain up the beach. It had to have been the exact same place where we saw it the first time. There were no drag marks in front of him, no footsteps, no indication that anyone had laid foot on the ground in front of him in the path that had previously been walked. The sand was dry. It wasn't washed over by waves or anything of the sort. We watched it for a moment out of curiosity as to what the actual hell was going on. We stood there dumbfounded, watching the figure trudge through the sand with this unfathomably massive chain dragging behind it. It stopped dragging the Satan chain and stared directly at us, piercing our soul and the essence of our being. We just stood there, jaw dropped, staring back at this shadowy figure. It begins to slowly march towards us, and we booked it through the sand. I've never run so fast in my life. We all pile into the car. Bro turns the engine on and we floor it out of there, easily hitting 80 miles an hour on the straight stretch of access road. We absolutely hauled serious ass out there. The entire time, I was staring out the back window of the car, for some reason expecting it to Terminator after us and catch up. Thankfully it didn't, and I never saw the shadowy figure again. It was the strangest, most heart-wrenching, terrifying thing I've ever seen. Neither of us were on any kind of drugs. We were all straight-edge kids, clean as a whistle, and shadow figures in chains scaring kids? Shame on them. A week or so later, a friend of ours who wasn't there that night told me that people used to practice black magic in the dunes there, and that there were artifacts of demonology and inverted crosses scattered about. I said his accusations were nonsense. Turns out it was all true. I went to the mum and asked her about it, and she said she had heard similar stories. So naturally we looked into it a bit, and then went out to search for said black magic, devil-worshipping sites. We were able to find some sort of inverted crosses, which were made of some sort of metal that was all but rusted over, and concrete blocks, probably a cubic meter in size in a few different places. Holes bored through them, and metal rings inserted through them, as if to be an anchor point. I put two and two together, and theorized that the chain was the one point connecting to these blocks in the dunes. For Lord knows what purpose, I assumed that that creature was a black magic / demonic summon, and I will never set foot on those cursed dunes again. Also, it turns out this is in the Oregon Ghost Stories book, which is chilling to have witnessed firsthand. It's certainly spooky stuff. In 2013, I moved into an apartment in Alma, Arkansas. I'm not sure if this had anything to do with it, but the apartment complex was right next to a very old graveyard. A little history on this apartment complex. I had lived there 3 times before: 2003, 2006, and 2009. Each time I got the same 1-bedroom apartment, number 208. It was always the only 1-bedroom available. Each time I would have strange things happen there. The first time cabinets would open, things would be in different places, and sometimes when I'd take a shower and close my eyes, I'd see the bathroom and shower covered in blood and blood coming out the shower. I'd open my eyes and it would be normal. The first time I lived there, that stuff intrigued me. I only moved out to move in with my girlfriend. Alma has very few options for apartments, and in 2006 when my girlfriend and I split up, I had to go back to the same apartment complex, and lo and behold, the exact same day I split with my girlfriend, the people living in 208 suddenly move out, and for the second time, I got the same apartment. It seemed a little weird, but I just wrote it off as a coincidence. This time, things were worse. I'd hear movements in my walk-in wardrobe and living room at night. The shower visions were more intense, and also while I was living here, did I get sleep paralysis? My first sleep paralysis episode was terrifying. I was laying asleep on the ground next to my new girlfriend, and at about 1 AM, I heard a DVD rack in the living room fall, and a lot of DVDs crashing to the floor. I was still half asleep when I looked towards my bedroom door, which I kept shut, and on this night, I had accidentally left my bathroom light on, and I could see the light right under the doors, but as I turned my head to the direction of the noise, and was about to holler out who's there, I hear running footsteps, like a kid. Then I saw the shadow of feet at the base of my bedroom door, in the bathroom light. No filler shadow, just the feet, and in a blink of an eye they moved from the door to my chest and disappeared. This all happened so fast, and I couldn't move or speak. But after seeing the shadow feet on my chest, I went to shake my girlfriend awake, but my arms couldn't move. So I say her name, but I couldn't speak. So in panic I try and sit up, but couldn't move at all. My eyes began to get heavy, and in a second I was dreaming of a shadow holding me down, covering my mouth. I fought and widened my eyes, and it was still there. I'm finally able to make noise, but it's just a raspy, pitiful help that is barely a whisper, and I'm able to slightly move my finger and touch my girlfriend. It's enough, and she opens her eyes and asks me what's wrong. I let out my pitiful help again as I widen my eyes in fear at my chest. My girlfriend starts shaking me, and when I don't respond, she slaps me. In an instant, the shadow is gone, and I'm awake and able to move. My girlfriend says she never heard the DVDs crashing and did not see the shadow. The DVDs were all still on the rack when I go to check the living room. My girlfriend witnessed and pulled me out of 3 more sleep paralysis episodes over the next few months, before leaving me because it freaked her out so badly. And then I moved out. Fast forward to 2009. I had married in 2007 and had a son that same year and a daughter in 2009. But my wife and I split, and I needed a place to stay, and once again had to go back to the same apartment complex. I couldn't afford anything better. Once again, for the 3rd time, the only apartment available is 208. But I didn't want to be homeless, so I asked the landlord if I could move into 208, and if it could be temporary, if another apartment opens up, he'll let it to me. He says yes, and I move in. But after 2 weeks of bloody visions, noises, and 2 more sleep paralysis episodes, I move out and stay with family. My wife and I got back together in 2013. We split for good and got split custody, and I needed a local place to live. And because this time I needed a 2-bedroom apartment, and knowing there is no chance of getting 208 because it's 1 bedroom, I go back to the complex and ended up getting 210, which is right next to 208. The even number apartments are on the 2nd floor, the odd on the bottom. 210 was the only available 2-bedroom apartment, so I take it and tell myself at least it's not 208. Nothing happened. At first, my kids and I really make it our home, and then it begins. One night I'm in my room and it's 2:30 in the morning. and I hear my kids banging toys around and giggling in their room. And I heard the TV come on, and it wakes me up. Irritated, I call out, "You guys are supposed to be asleep. Don't make me ground you." The banging and giggling stops, but I still hear the TV going, and I get up and walk to their shut doors, still half asleep, and say, "Okay, kiddos, I told you to go back to..." As I begin opening their door, it occurs to me that my kids are at their mum's. I had taken them back to her the evening before. A chill runs down my body as I slowly push the door open and see toys strewn all about and cartoons playing on TV. I turn the lights on, unplug the TV, and then bolt to the living room, shutting their door behind me. I turned all the lights on in the apartment and sat up on edge all night. Nothing else happens, but the next week, while my kids were there, I'd catch my 3-year-old daughter talking to somebody when my 6-year-old son wasn't around her. So I asked her who she talked to, and she replied, "My friend's old mum. Her kid got burned up, so she's nice to me because I look like her little girl." My daughter said this word for word, and usually she couldn't talk that plain. I immediately called her mum and asked her who'd she been having watch over them, but she says that it's just cartoons. I once again got a chill down my entire body. My son never saw what Alexis saw. Over the next few months, my little girl continued to talk about old mum, sometimes even pointing behind me telling me she's watching me to make sure I'm a good daddy. Very creepy. Over the past few years, my little girl has gotten to like spooky stuff and is fascinated with scary shows and movies. But at this time she was only 3 and had never even seen scary stuff, so I was really getting concerned and had a hard time sleeping. Then one night, I was reading a kid's book called The Monster in My Closet to my kids. They lay in bed as I was sitting in the chair next to the bed, and at the end of the book is a page that says for the kid reading to draw the monster in their closet. This gave me an idea. I told my daughter to draw the old mum for me. She sits up, I give her a pencil and the book, and she says, "Can you move, Daddy? She's behind you and I can't see her." I scoot away a little, and my girl looks in the direction where I sat before, then looks down, draws a little, looks up again, then draws some more, and continues to do this until she finishes. She hands me the picture. I look at it, and I begin to tremble and my heart races. That weekend, we moved to an apartment in the next town over. Some might say it was her imagination, and she just made up the drawing. But she was 3, and I believe if she made it up, she wouldn't have taken her eyes off the paper as she drew it. But she kept looking up as she drew, and that tells me she was looking at old mum while drawing her, in order to reference. Now that you can see the drawing, you will understand why we moved. So first, a little background. I'm a 25-year-old mother of 2 wonderful kids, a boy who's 5, a girl who's 2, and a very smart stepson who's 8. It's mainly about my son, the 5-year-old, CJ, and my stepson, Liam. Just so you know a little bit about CJ, he's a very hyper and imaginative boy. He's not great with books or writing, and has a speech delay, but very great with motor skills and figuring things out. Now, since CJ was a baby, he's done some odd things, to which I have never looked much into. The first thing was night terrors as a baby. I guess they're common, but my mother, husband and I found them weird, because what could a baby be afraid of? He would scream in his sleep, but wake up and be just fine. Now fast forward to when he was 2. He would use toy guns and clear rooms in a way police or military would. I never thought much about it, but my husband, being ex-military and now law enforcement, would watch him and notice how he would do it so accurately that it was puzzling. Then, when he was about 3 or 4, he would complain about the monsters during the day and at night. Common things I knew, but he would point to empty closets or corners of rooms and say, "Scary," or "Monster," or "Scary hand get me," or "He's dark." Even once when he was 4, he grabbed a Bible and went through the closet and say, "We need to exercise." But again, I guess a common thing kids have because of the big imaginations. Now fast forward to a few days ago. My husband and the kids and I are driving to Walmart to get things for our daughter's 2nd birthday. When we pass an ambulance, then out of the blue CJ says, "Grandma's dead," which puzzled us, and we asked him what he said. He repeated, "Grandma's dead." So we asked, "Grandma B or Grandma K?" "No, Liam's grandma," he says. So we laughed and Liam says, "Your grandma is my grandma," and we just laughed the whole thing off. Then about 30 minutes later, Liam's mum calls him and tells him, "Your stepdad's grandma died." To which he was sad and we tended to him. It wasn't until maybe an hour or so later I turned to my husband and say, "Oh my god, CJ predicted that." To which we were freaked out a bit. I don't know, maybe if it's a coincidence. Kids say odd things, but it's hard to deny the odd things that seem to happen around my son. When I was 6 years old, my father, who was in the United States Air Force, was stationed in Upper Hayford in the UK. We lived in a village in Warwickshire in a 150-year-old house that had very old wooden floors that were uneven and would creak with every step. One day I had a friend over, and we thought to go upstairs to my room and play. My room was the first room along a hallway at the end of the stairs. The other rooms on the hallway were for storage, and at the end of the hall, a stairway that led up to the attic. My friend and I took turns rolling my Hot Wheels and Matchbox cars down the hallway outside my room towards the stairs to the attic. Because the floors were uneven, the cars would go about 3/4 of the way down the hall. We kept going into my room to find more toys that we could roll down the hall, and came across a toy motorcycle about the size of an adult's hand that had square-edged tires, so it was capable of standing by itself. When we rolled it down the hall, it went all the way down to where the attic stairs were, and toppled over on its side. We went into my room again to find more cars, and when we got back into the hallway, I looked to the end of the hall and saw the motorcycle. It was standing straight up facing towards my room. I asked my friend if he saw it fall, and he confirmed that he saw it fall down, and that it had been facing the attic stairs. He had been with me the whole time looking for cars to roll down the hall, so I know he didn't move the motorcycle. I called my mum to see if she was there, and she responded from downstairs. My dad was still at the Air Force Base. If she or anyone had come up the stairs, we would have heard them, as the floors creak. Our dog was downstairs with her, and if he'd have come up, I could have heard his nails clicking on the wooden floor. To this day, 40 years later, I have no explanation for how the toy that was on its side turned upright and reversed without making a sound. I'm a 23-year-old female. The night of this incident, I was travelling from Glasgow to Aberdeen by train, alone, late at night. At the Glasgow station, the train was almost empty. In my cabin there was me and another guy sitting at the opposite end of the corner, at the seat that was the most far away from me. The train makes many stops from Glasgow to Aberdeen. As it does, more people come in. But still not many on a Wednesday night at 10 p.m. As the train is about to leave Glasgow station, a man enters the cabin. And to my surprise, regardless of the vast choice of comfortable empty seats everywhere, he chooses to sit right next to me. I thought right away that it was extremely annoying since I had to move my bag that I had and overall reduce the space that I could occupy all around me. There was no reason for him to sit next to me, with all those empty seats and 4-seat slots all around. I figured he did it because as the train progressed, more people would come in. But that wasn't a good enough excuse, because usually not too many people do so, and also because he could have still been seated elsewhere and waited to have shared a space when and if the occasion actually arose. After he sits down, he says hi. I nod politely. A man in his 60s, normal weight, is all I notice about this individual. Nothing actually catches my attention about this man that is worth remembering. "Are you traveling alone?" he asks in an attempt to make conversation. "Yep," I reply briefly. I was really tired and not in the mood to make conversation. If he sat next to me for some words of company, he had chosen the wrong person at the wrong time. "Where are you going tonight, Lisa?" I heard him call me by name. I was startled, but then I thought I must have misheard it, and that it was not possible that he knew my name, and that it was just a trick of my ears. But I decided to not inquire as to how he knew my name, so that if in future he made the same mistake, I could have been sure he knew my name without me previously telling him. "I'm going to Aberdeen," I replied politely. I just wasn't sure if he had bad intentions, or if he was just a friendly pal, and I didn't feel like I could make such an assumption yet. "What are you going there for?" "Business," I lie, but I just don't feel like sharing my life with this man, and I don't think he is entitled to know. Plus, I need to make sure he knows I am expected, and people know where I am going. I was actually directed to meet my old professor and have a chat with him. Then maybe just wander around the city and enjoy it. But nobody was really expecting me. At this point I'm very tired and do not have the mental energy to sustain a conversation, so I brush off the bad vibe this guy is sending me through my spine and listen to some music with my eyes closed. The train ride is 3 hours long, and I persist concentrating on my phone, while the man next to me tries to reignite the conversation every time he sees an opening. Months have passed now, and I can't quite remember what he was saying. I was indeed extremely tired, and very unwilling to dedicate my time to him. As we approach Aberdeen, my phone is in extremely low battery, so I decide it's better to save the remaining. As I put away my phone, I see with the corner of my eyes that his torso is directed towards me. I look up, and he is smiling creepily. Because I was in public transport, I felt more annoyed by his behavior than scared, because I knew, as long as I was in the middle of civilization, nothing could happen to me. "What job do you do?" I asked him to divert the stream of questions he was asking me about my job, where I live, and where I was going. "I'm a charity worker," he says. "Can you be a bit more specific?" Again, by this point, I wasn't actually sure if this guy was just trying to have a polite conversation or had more creepy intent. "I work with school kids." "Oh, and in which way do you help them?" I ask. I organize things, plans to help them." "Ah, what kind of plans?" Just regular organization for kids in need," he says, mumbling. I was surprised that he could not go into more details of the specific job he did, but I figured maybe he just didn't want to share. "Who is awaiting for you in Aberdeen?" he asks. My friends will be there. I lie. I could drive you back to their place, he says. Nah, thank you. I insist, it's no problem for me. I got a chill down my spine thinking of being in a car alone with this man. I decline the invite once again. As the train stops in Aberdeen, he stands up right away to grab my luggage. I'll carry it for you. No need, I say, but I am ignored. Once we get out of the train station, I say thank you, but I will get my luggage from here. He says that he doesn't see anyone waiting for me, and that he can give me a ride, that it's dangerous for a girl to go alone. At this point, I lie again. My friends will be here soon. Goodbye. No friends were waiting, so I waited for him to be out of sight, and then I run to the hotel I booked, while constantly checking if I was being followed. I was now in a street that was completely dark and empty. Aberdeen in winter is not the most lively of cities. I see a car approaching and slowing down. I start running. My hotel was only 3 minutes away at this point. I get inside and feel safe again. I kept wondering what would have happened if my respects for politeness and instincts hadn't kicked in, and I'd have accepted that ride. This past September, I had taken a road trip down to Myrtle Beach with the family. It was myself, my mother, my sister, her husband and their 2 kids. We had used my car and both my sister and husband's car to transport everything and all of us. We had rented a beach house for a little over a week and had a pretty great time. I was in the middle of a difficult point in my life and struggling with employment and being between jobs and having just started 2 new jobs fresh. I was a little low on funds and worried about making my car payments and the like. So I opted to head home 2 days early with my car so that I could try and get more work hours in. My family expressed being nervous as I planned to leave after dinner and drive through the night to get home. I consoled them that I would be okay, because I'd be up all night and head straight home and only stop for gas and food as needed. I'm an excellent driver, a tad impatient, so I tend to go until I absolutely have to stop and take a break. However, this would be a 12-hour trip, and I knew I would need breaks, so I made a point to stop at every rest stop to at least get out and stretch, so I stayed awake and didn't get too sore. Going through West Virginia, I'm sure you guys know how secluded their rest stops and visitor centers are, especially when you're heading north from the south going through the mountains. I stopped at a visitor center because they advertised having a fast food joint, and I really had to answer nature's call. This was sometime very late at night, between 1 and 3 a.m. Side note that sent shivers down my spine after what happened: I like to drive barefoot. So I pulled in, noticed the building with fast food was closed, and I drove around the lot and parked under a street light in front of the visitor center so that I could use the restroom. Leaning out of my car door, I took my time putting my shoes on and walking inside, having looked around and not seeing anything out of the ordinary. I checked my phone, grabbed my wallet before standing up to walk in, and made sure my car made the noise to signal the doors were locked. Walking towards the center, I saw a man in a white hoodie standing at the edge of the sidewalk, leading into the center. I didn't think much of it until I passed him, and got an off vibe. I glanced over at my shoulder, and he was watching me walk in. For some reason, I glanced to my left as I turned back to face forwards, and noted another man sitting at the benches that were on the other side of tall, thin bushes. Oh no, I thought. I instantly went in, peed, and before I got out the bathroom I called my roommate. As dumb as it was, because he was a good 4 to 6 hours away, it just made me feel safer. I gave him a quick rundown of my situation and made him stay on the phone with me. I started to walk out and couldn't see the man at the front of the sidewalk anymore. I glanced to my now right and saw both men standing next to a bench facing forwards. I saw a couple walking in to, presumably, use the restroom as well. I had an intense impulse to ask them to walk with me, but my paranoia kicked in because I knew something was wrong somewhere in my situation, and I didn't ask, thinking that they might know the men. Walking briskly to my car, I explained to my roommate that the men were by the benches, daring the smallest of peeks over my shoulder again. And I saw the man in the white hoodie walking towards me, and I told my roommate. Walking a few paces forwards, I looked back and saw his pace had quickened. At this point, I told my roommate that he was following me to my car, and I booked it. I thankfully had the key fob, got my key out, and ready to unlock my car, and practically threw myself in, not daring to glance back. I threw my car in reverse and gunned it backwards before going back into drive and sped off, and didn't even bother to put my seatbelt on until I was at the exit of the parking lot, and didn't look back once. I stopped at the next toll road and filed a report, and the workers called for state troopers to head over and check things out. I didn't stop shaking for hours, and refused to get out of my car until I was home. I horrified myself at the thought. If those guys had paid attention and made their move quicker, they could have incapacitated me at my car while I was facing the ground and putting my shoes on, and I could have had absolutely no defense. Please, be careful on the road. I'm sharing this because I have to get it off my chest, and I just drunk enough to not care about what my former bosses would say about me disclosing incident reports or anything remotely similar. I suppose an introduction is in order. My name is Randy Hamilton. I've been an EMT for almost a decade. Well, I guess it would be more accurate to say I was an EMT. Me and my former employers had what you would call a conflict of interest, and I turned in my resignation about 3 days ago. Really, it was just a formality. They would have fired me if I hadn't. For the past 30-odd years, I've lived in the little town of McDermott, Ohio. Beautiful little slice of Appalachia. As long as you can overlook the fact that it's located in the heart of the heroin epidemic sweeping the Midwest. Hell, Scioto County was leading the state in heroin OD cases last time I checked. And from my time in the department, I can verify that statement. So you're probably wondering what got me so eaten up that I had to down a half bottle of whiskey to open up about it. Well, pull up a seat and get comfortable, because you're going to be here a while. I joined the department in '07, fresh out of school, and went through courses to get certified as an RN. But then I realized working in an office really wasn't my style. Turns out stabilizing trauma victims in the back of a speeding vehicle was. I had to take a couple of more classes, but they were cake compared to what I'd already done, and I was pretty sure I had found my calling. Pretty sure is the key word there. You never forget your first run. The feeling's comparable to when you lose your virginity, except it's typically not as pleasant of an experience. Mine? Car wreck. 18-wheeler hit a red 2005 Chevy Cobalt. Well, nicked it more like. Semi was absolutely fine, barely a scratch on it. The Chevy? Not so much. Girl behind the wheel swerved and hit the guardrail. Flipped the car too. We got there about 3 minutes after the call went out. And we, being me and my partner for that shift, Michael. Mike was and still is a great guy. A little morbid at times, but in our line of work, you just pick that up. He'd been on for 4 years before I joined, and had some pretty messed up stories of his own. As we were making our way to what was left of the cobalt, I saw something that turned my blood to ice. Laying off on the side of the road, about 50 feet out from where the cobalt came to rest, was the driver. Even from so far away, I could tell she wasn't going to make it. Her lower jaw was an absolute mangled wreck, and I could see the white glint of bone sticking out of her forearm. Compound fracture for sure. Jesus Christ, I said, absolutely shocked at what I was seeing. How the hell did she? That's why you wear a seatbelt, rookie. Last thing you want to do is go face first through a windshield doing 60. Mike's words hit even harder when we got closer and saw that this girl was still alive. I doubt any of you have any idea of what sort of horrific sounds came out of the mouth of a human being who has what basically amounts to little more than minced hamburger meat for a jaw. Pained, wet gurgling, mixed with involuntary exhalation, not so dissimilar from an asthmatic wheeze. That's what I heard that came out of her mouth. Within seconds, we had her on a stretcher, going with another ambulance. Sometimes I like to think she made a miraculous recovery, and I just haven't got the memo. I'm not that stupid though. With injuries like that, she'd had to have been fed through a straw for the rest of her short and agonizing life. That wasn't what got me that night. What did get me was when we checked out the cobalt proper. There was a massive streak of blood mixed with bits of brain matter and skull fragments, which started where the car had flipped on its side and ended at the rear left of the passenger window. Almost immediately, I thought the worst and took a closer look. That's when I heard the crying. Turns out the girl driving was a babysitter, and she had 2 little girls in the back seat, and only 1 open seat. Irresponsible jackass had stacked the kids on top of each other and had them sharing a seatbelt. A reckless driver, improperly secured children, and an open window. Recipe for disaster. We had to cut in through the roof of the car to get the girls, and when I looked through that hole, something in me died. The surviving girl had her sister's decapitated corpse laying on her lap and was holding onto the body like her life depended on it. When she looked up at me through the hole, with a level of sorrow no girl her age should be able to comprehend, let alone experience, I broke. I pulled her out of that wreck and hugged her with tears in my eyes and told her it was all going to be okay, that we were going to get her home as soon as we got her checked out. While I carried her to the ambulance, Mike was confirming that the other child was dead. That's when the girl in my arms said something that still haunts me to this very day. Why are you leaving Veronica? Why are you leaving my sister? She's hurt. Please. Can't you help her, mister? I still have nightmares to this day about that night. About that little girl and her sister. And I just don't know how much longer I can deal with it. That's enough for tonight. The whiskey's wearing off. I don't feel like going back to that night any more than I have to. Veronica and Abigail. Those were their names. I'm sorry I couldn't help her, Abby. I'm so sorry. I lived in the same house all my life, until I was 18 and went away for school. Jim has also lived next door for the entirety of me living at home. He lived with his mother. She died when he was about 60-something, and then he just lived alone. up until his death, which was about in his 70s. He dyed his hair red. He'd often wear t-shirts that you'd see on young boys, like Superman and the Flash. I guess his style of dress wasn't too out of the ordinary, but it just added to his odd character. Apparently, when one of my neighbors first moved in, who was a well-known lawyer in the area, Jim stopped him on the street and said, "Hey Aaron, aren't you afraid of someone just coming up to you and shooting you?" At this time, my neighbor hadn't met Jim and had no idea who he was, so he was extra weirded out and even feared for his safety. He did a background check on him after that and found nothing, so at least we knew that he had no history. Now comes the weird stuff I've experienced with Jim. He had terrible road rage. I was once driving, stopped at a light, and when it turned green for me I started to go, and he did too, and should have been stopped. He almost hit me, so I slammed on my brakes and saw him jump out the car, not knowing who the driver was initially. I was shocked to find out it had been Jim, and he shook his fists and started screaming things like, "I'm gonna end you," in anger. I don't think he knew it was me, luckily, and I never brought it up to him later. I'm just glad that we didn't have a collision. My family once received a call from Jim that said, "I saw your light was on at 2 a.m. What were you doing up so late?" We're not close with Jim, as I'm sure you know by now, so to be asked was really not polite and quite stalkerish. Also, I'd often open my front door to find him just standing in the doorway, staring straight at my house. I guess he could just be looking outside, observing passers-by, or birds or something. But come on. He was also obsessed with my dog, who he'd call his favorite girl. If I'd ever be walking out there and he'd see her, he'd stop and speak to her specifically, and act like I didn't exist. The worst thing he ever did, though, happened on Thanksgiving. This was when his mother was still alive, because she forced him to call us the day after to apologize. Thanksgiving night, Jim just so happened to be cleaning his loaded gun aimed out of his window, and he shot our house. My mum found the shell fragments or something like that on our porch. I would have liked to have heard his apology, or how he worded it even, but all I want to know is if he didn't want to willingly call us and was forced to do it by his mother. He never fixed his window that had the bullet hole. I remember seeing it years later. My bedroom is above the porch, so I just feel really lucky he hadn't somehow shot up into my room when I was asleep. After Jim passed, a few neighbors speculated he may have been autistic, which would make perfect sense with some sort of his mannerisms and the way he spoke, and why he never moved away from his mother's. But nonetheless, he did some creepy stuff during my time at my parents' house. When I was 7 or 8, my family went to the beach and rented a hotel room. We had the kind of rooms that you rent out both and they connect through a door. There's one door to leave the room, and there is the door in between that connects the rooms individually. In the room connecting to ours there was an army family, military father, some kids and a wife. My older sister was supposed to be watching me, as we were down at the jacuzzi during the evening, as we're just playing and hanging out and having a good time. I didn't get out much, was naive and a little kid, and to give a little description, we're both white-skinned, blue-eyed blondes. Then, this person sits in the jacuzzi with us. She starts conversing with us and is just making herself very comfortable. I was very naive as a kid, and eventually we started talking books, and she's talking about her kids, who we haven't seen yet. We are having a really good conversation. I felt like it was very in-depth, and my sister decides she wants to go back to the room. But I don't. I wanted to stay and talk with this lady, so my sister goes back to the room, and now it's just 7-year-old me and some 40-year-old women. It should have set off some creepy alarm bells, but it did not. She just starts talking about going and walking on the beach. It's about 10 p.m. and she wants to go on the walk and get shells. I thought it was a great idea. I'd get to walk on the beach at night. I felt so free and like a big kid. I didn't need my sister or anything. So I run back to the room to tell my grandparents that I'm walking on the beach with Sue, or whatever her name was. I remember my grandmother reading her book, barely listening to what I said, and she just shook me off. It's important to know I didn't live with my parents. So I start walking down the corridor that was really dark and dim, as it was quite cheap. I'm going through the stairwell like something out of a movie. Too bad I'd never seen this movie. As I'm walking through it, the woman is at the bottom telling me to hurry up. While walking through the stairs, Army Dad comes running down and asks where I'm going. He told me, "Your mum is calling you. It's really important, we gotta go," and basically grabbed me by the wrist softly and led me back to our room. He knocked on our door and explained what had happened. I never thought much about it until a year ago, when it came back to me. This woman was leading me away to the beach alone at night, and this army guy got a terrible feeling in his gut, so he intervened. When he said my mum was looking for me, and I don't live with my mum, it set off some alarm bells in my head. That's when I realized something was up, so I didn't resist going back to my family. As a kid, I knew since he was saying my mum wanted me, it was important. I just knew something was up because I don't live with her. I'm now 20 years old, and I truly believe that this woman was trying to lure me away to do God knows what. And this army dude had a bad feeling and saved my life. Thinking back, I get such a bad feeling all throughout my body. I now know that I wouldn't have made it back from that beach trip. Thank you, army dude. Your gut feeling and having a watchful eye saved something terrible from happening to me. That woman was creepy. We never even saw her kids. This happened to me when I was about 5. I don't actually remember it, but it's what my mum told me, and she isn't the kind of person to lie about things, especially when she's only telling them to me and has no one to impress. So, I'm gonna take it as truth. Allegedly, when I was 3, I would walk around the house naked. This started out of nowhere, and when asked by my mother why I was doing this, I would apparently always reply, "Because that's how the lady does it." My mum didn't really understand, but kind of brushed it off. There were a few times when I'd wake up screaming in the middle of the night. Apparently, I'd say that the lady had come to pay a visit. My mother tried ruling it out as just a night terrors and me fixating on an imaginary character, and thought nothing more of it. It wasn't until a few years later, with these events still persisting, that a neighbour from the area got friendly with my mum. They came round, and out of nowhere the conversation turned to this house's history, as of course my mother was quite interested, having lived in here a few years. The neighbour told her a story, that there was a woman before that lived in this house about 30 years ago. Allegedly, she committed arson in several places around town, and when she thought she was being found out, she burnt herself alive in the garden. However, while she was on fire, she realized it was a bad idea and ran into the house, smacked things over her face and eyes to try and put the flame out, and blinded herself. She managed to get the fires out, but she was blind. The burns were so gnarly though that she ended up dying a few days later in hospital because of complications. Funny thing is, they never found out it was her. It was all in her mind, that she thought that they were finding her out. The house was put up for sale, and the lady said that it had been sold countless times, but people had never stayed here as long as we had, and she found it incredibly fascinating and didn't know why they left, that maybe it left a dark aura. That's when it all clicked with my mum. My mum then summoned me into the room. "Haley, honey, come here." I entered. "Tell me about that lady that you used to see." "The lady who has the black eyes and face?" "Yeah, that one. What does she look like?" "Her whole body is black, and she smells funny." That is all I said, until I wandered away. My mum and the woman were left absolutely stunned. It all added up. Was I seeing the ghost of this dead lady? Never ignore that sudden feeling you get when you need to get out of some place. Never, ever. It saved my life. I was at a party that doubled as a sending off party for me before I deployed, and there was an after party planned in which I was going to DJ along with some of my other friends. I did a short set at the party, then dropped Simi. Yeah, I know I don't need a lecture, and ran around having fun with all my friends and my former production company. 2 hours later, I suddenly become absolutely dead sober and had that horrible feeling that we needed to leave and we needed to do it right that second. I immediately rounded up the friends I had and took everyone home and fell straight to sleep. The next morning I was woken by a phone call. It was a friend telling me that at the after party, our friends had been ended by a psycho going through the house with a shotgun. That's where I would have been if I hadn't have got that feeling and went home immediately. This, for those of you who don't know, is the Capitol Hill Massacre, committed by 28-year-old Kyle Aaron Huff. He entered the rave and opened fire, finishing 6 off and wounding 2, and then turned on himself as he was being confronted by the police on the porch. It was horrifying. I need to give you a bit of context. I live on the ground floor of my building, alone, in a small apartment. I'm a male standing at 5'11". I've lived here for the past 5 months. When I moved in, I had 2 neighbors on my floor, a single mother with 2 children directly next to my apartment, and an Asian woman in her 50s. The Asian woman was a bit creepy, as she was peeking through her door when I visited the apartment. Then, when I brought my belongings inside for a second time, then never saw her again. In the middle of October, the single mother and her 2 children kind of disappeared. I never saw them again and assumed that they had simply moved out. The other apartment, however, had its doors and windows closed. Around that time, I started to notice the corridor had the smell of the green stuff almost every morning. Note that this is still the case up to today. I have no problem with that, as I really don't care so long as my apartment doesn't smell. 2 weeks ago, problems started to occur. One morning I heard 2 men speaking there and laughing in the other apartment. It was the first time I'd heard someone living there, so I was in a bit of shock, and I just told myself, he just found a mate to smoke with, and didn't think too much about it. However, since that, it's been 3 times, and these 2 guys, when they arrive to their apartment, go and look around every door in the corridor. Since there are only 3, they're very loud, and it's easy to know when they're near mine. They always stay a few minutes then leave, but the last time was the scariest. I was chilling, playing on my Wii as I had nothing else to do with my evening. It was around 7 p.m. Then suddenly I hear them coming in the corridor. I was starting to get used to it, but I always locked my door, so I thought nothing of it. Then suddenly, someone started hitting my door almost like they were punching them, then started to grab the doorknob and shake it about. Then they left. When the banging started, I panicked. I threw my Wiimote to grab the nearest knife in the kitchen and froze, asking myself what to do. I waited a few minutes after they left to check if my doors were fully locked, and I was relieved that I always locked them. I never leave the doors unlocked even if I'm in. I genuinely don't know what to do, since there's technically no evidence and I'm fine, but I'd rather never meet them again. This story happened to my mostly skeptical sister. They had an old TV, not flat screen, which would pop up a message at the top when it was turned on or off. You could program what it would say, but it was hello and goodbye by default, and they had never changed the message. They were living in a very old house in historical Stonington, Connecticut. Not one of the big, nice houses in the main part of the village. They lived in a sort of poor people house off the side on the edge of town, old enough to have cloth around the wiring instead of modern plastic, and horsehair plaster. She never really liked that place, but it was what they could afford. A few times, she and her boyfriend were sitting in the living room and talking while the TV was on. Every once in a while, the TV would display a message like it did when it turned on or off, but it wasn't hello or goodbye. It would say things related to what they were talking about, like, "That's true," or would say something like, "Phone will ring," right before the phone rang. My sister and her boyfriend would pretty much leave the room when that happened. They got rid of the TV as soon as they could. From what they remember, she said that it also happened in the next house they moved into, but I'm not entirely sure about that. This is my grandma's story. She was born in the 40s, when folks were nice and nobody thought that people would be taken. She and her 9 siblings often took the trains by themselves, going to and from the big city where they lived and their grandparents' place that was a 4-hour train ride away. Usually they did this on weekends to give their mum and dad a break. One day, Grandma was 9, about to be 10 that weekend, and she was going to her grandparents' house a day before everyone else by herself. That was common and pretty ordinary. She got dropped off at the train station, got boarded on the train by her dad, and she went off. Half of the way there, the train makes one of its stops, and everyone is asked to evacuate because there's a malfunction with the rails. My grandma, Yara, is very scared, and she has no money to get on the train back. In the middle of the chaos, a man dressed as a train driver approaches her and asks if she's all right. He is an authority, and so she sees him as safe and explains everything. He says his next train is exactly towards where she wants to go, and says that she can come aboard the cabin and ride all the way there as his co-pilot. She is very excited and boards the train without a ticket, and sits as his co-pilot as promised. Halfway through the journey, she realizes it's taking way longer than the usual trip, and he gives excuses. "We're going a different route," he says. She steps away to go to the bathroom, and he doesn't want to let her go, and that's when he starts to panic. She manages to convince him, and after about 2 cabins, she asks someone where the train is heading, and they say a completely different town as to where she should be going. She doesn't say how, but she was crying and wandering the cabins, until she miraculously runs into one of her uncles, who listens to the story, and they get off at the next stop. He puts her on the right train, and she makes it back safely to the city where she lives, so not her grandparents. Apparently, none of her family made it a priority to find out who the guy was, though I suppose it'd be easy, since he worked for the train company or worked that route. Her uncle looked for the man a few times, but not with any determination. She had nightmares for years, and her parents stopped letting the little kids ride the train by themselves after that. For much of her youth, she was petrified that she'd run into him. So yeah, I hope that they never meet, but my grandma's 76 now, so it's unlikely. About 2 years ago, me and my family moved from New Jersey to Florida for a fresh start. Before I start my encounter, I want to iterate my mental state at the time because it contributes to how I acted at the time of this story. So the night of the move, my mother got a call from a close family friend. She had just become pregnant and had started to have complications and feared she lost the baby. My mother, being the awesome woman she is, went over to help and watched her young son, and calm our friend down and told her to go to the hospital to be sure and get her checked out. She and her husband rushed to the hospital, and luckily they hadn't lost the baby. But it wasn't until 1 in the morning until my mother got back, and I was still up waiting for her to return. So yes, we were dead tired the next day, and we had to pack everything up for the long trip to our new home in Florida, while my father, who had slept through the whole ordeal that night before, was not. Anyway, I'm driving with my mother while my father is in another car, and I'm not exactly happy about the move. So tired and upset, we continued with our trip. We've always driven from New Jersey to Florida for years, and never had any weird experiences on the road. I'm not sure about my parents, but they've never talked about anything creepy in my 22 years of being alive, and I've traveled with them. And trust me, they love to tell me stories, and I do too. So when this happened, I was wholly unprepared for it. It certainly didn't help what happened the night before either. So we stop at one of the many stops on our way to Florida, and I think we were in the Carolinas or something near there when we stopped. Now, if you've never traveled before by car, a rest stop is a place like a civic center area. These places are for travelers who need a minute to stretch or go to the bathroom, or a place where they can safely rest for the night in their cars. These places are usually well lit and have vending machines for anyone who needs a snack or drink. It was late, maybe about 9 at night, and we stopped to stretch our legs and go to the bathroom. I wanted a few snacks, so I asked my mother for some. She gave them to me, and I entered the nice little enclosed area that contained the machines. So I'm standing there alone, picking what I want, when this woman comes in. She's short, skinny older woman who's dressed nice with bleached blonde hair. When I glance at her and smile politely, she comes right up to me and holds out her hand for a shake, and introduces herself. Dumbfounded, I shake her hand back, and stupidly told her my name. After that, she launches into this tale of woe about how she lost her wedding ring, had a head wound, and that her car was out of gas, and that she needed some money and other things that I honestly can't remember. I'm just standing there listening and trying to figure out how to get out of this situation. Now you have to understand this was literally the first time anyone had ever approached me at one of these stops. Mostly because I think I don't have the most friendly of faces for people to approach. Even though I'm a girl, I'm tall at around 5'6". Taller than most girls, especially this woman, with broad shoulders, and I resemble my father, who doesn't have the most welcoming of faces either, an accent. But me? I'm a bleeding heart, and never want to be rude to people. But in this situation, I would have been, if it hadn't been so out of the blue. When I'm in situations that are new to me, I tend to freeze up and can't think. I don't know how to act, or what to do, as I'm not expecting it. As you can guess, I'm a big introvert and socially awkward, but I don't have a problem with telling people to go away. In this situation, I'm outright to panic, and I just want to get away from this weird woman. And I say weird because that head injury she mentioned, she didn't have one, not even a single bruise. And she was talking so fast and non-stop, I couldn't even tell her no. I can't help her, or even try. For some reason, being polite was more important than getting the hell away from her. So I'm standing there exhausted to my bones, about to shove what little money I have at her so that she just goes away, when my mother walks in. My badass of a mother comes right in. I'm taller than her, by the way, and says that I can't and tells me to come with her. The woman takes a step back, and I realize just how close she was. I hadn't even noticed she was steadily coming closer as she was talking. She tells my mother how beautiful and nice I am, when really I look like a greasy mess, because I don't care about my appearance when I'm taking a road trip. My mother doesn't really respond, and she has me by the arm walking towards the bathroom, asking if I'm okay. That woman got the hell out of there, and goes in the opposite direction of where her car was. Looking back on it all, I thought it was just weird, and I was certainly weirded out by it all. But I just thought whatever. But after listening to YouTube and reading Reddit posts, I realized how lucky I was 2 years later that the situation hadn't escalated. I think the reason she approached me was because my money was folded, and it looked like I had a lot more on me, when in reality I only had $6 to $7. And because it was probably obvious to her how tired I was, and how much of an easy score she could have gotten in my tired, grumpy state, she went for it. So if anyone hears this, I hope you aren't planning on traveling alone. But if you are, be careful. Even of the people who look completely normal. You can never be too careful, especially at the people looking for an easy score. So strange woman who was lying through her teeth, wanting to get the $6 out my hands, please, let's never meet again. My mother was a teenager and had a dream where my Uncle Doug was banging on some large doors while laying down. He was trying to yell something but was injured badly. My mother says what woke her was the pounding noise on the door. She wakes up and runs to my grandparents' room crying. Doug's in trouble, he's hurt. She tries to explain her dream, and they comfort her back to bed. Not long later, my mother wakes up again, but this time the knocks are real. My grandmother opens the doors to 2 policemen. They tell my family that Doug had been stabbed in the parking lot in a local bar and was in hospital. Apparently my Uncle Doug had some words with 4 of the other guys in the bar about his girlfriend. They went to leave, and the 4 guys jumped him in the back of the bar. He yelled for his girlfriend to drive off and get help, so she did. But after the assault, he was found by one of the employees at the back of the bar, knocking with his little amount of strength on his stomach. They narrowly missed the main artery too. He still has visible scars that he's shown me. Take what you will from the story, but it creeps me out a lot. My sister has 3 kids. I don't have any. Which means that I absolutely love being the auntie that spoils her nieces and nephews. Her newest addition is called Kaylee. She's 3 and is an absolute sweetheart. They recently moved into this bungalow in the middle of the woods. It is absolutely massive, and I do love their property. But one of the things that unnerves me is that the house has this eerie vibe. I felt that way for a while about it. Anyway, on to the story. I love Kaylee. She is such a sweetheart. But sometimes she comes out with the strangest things. I was once staying over babysitting the 3 kids while her and her husband had some quality time alone at the cinema. We were just hanging out, and out of nowhere, Kaylee waddles into the room. I ask her if everything's alright, and she points up to the very high ceiling and says, "The man's watching me." "What, Kaylee?" I look up, and there's no man. Remember how I said this is a bungalow? It's flat. There's no upstairs, just high ceilings. Did a balloon get up there? I look again, and there's nothing. Kaylee, sweetheart, you're imagining things, there's nothing there. This is where the inner 3-year-old comes out, and she gets angry. No, you're not looking, Auntie, he's right there. I look up again, and still can't see anything. Then she looks up, as if whatever she can see is talking to her, nods her head, and walks out. I ask Kaylee where she's going, and she just screams, she's got to find the rope. At this point, I was very concerned. I run after her and ask her where the hell she thinks she's going. She was going into her dad's workshop to look for some rope. When I ask her why, she says she doesn't know, but the man wants it and that he needs the rope now. I had just about had it at this point. I was very creeped out, and those 3 kids had an early bedtime for sure. I didn't babysit for a while, and the husband found the house far too eerie, and they moved out shortly after. I used to be a first responder in my town, and responded to one of the worst one-car accidents my town has ever seen. My town is very peaceful, but that does not stop unpeaceful people from coming through, and sometimes causing an accident. Early one morning, we got a call for a single car accident on a road that people drive too fast on, far too often. It's sort of a main road. It's a main route, but rarely had lots of traffic, and it's a pretty heavily wooded area. In my area, roads going through woods usually means that road is super curvy. The driver was probably taking a turn too fast, didn't turn in time for the next one coming up, and hit a slope that turned his car over. That's what I thought before I saw the car. This thing was mangled. I had no idea a car could get so banged up all on its own. There was glass everywhere. Car juice, as I called it, sprayed around. I could definitely see where the car hit, but also looks like it ran into a lot of tree before setting where it is. We passed a tree that had damage just as we were pulling up to the accident. So, somehow, this guy not only hit a tree on a turn, but also continued to roll/tumble up the road and then upside down in the other lane facing the wrong direction. It was maybe 10 to 20 yards away from the first tree that we assumed he hit. When we arrived, there was another truck from the department on the scene, the rescue truck, and the jaws of life were already at work trying to pry this kid out. The EMS had stretchers standing by, but he needed to be airlifted to the hospital. Me and another firefighter went to a very conveniently located field to place markers for the Lifestar helicopter. They came within a few minutes, but were nervous to land in the area because it was very small. While the lieutenant was helping the Lifestar, I was beckoned to help the victim. This guy had no face. He was totally unrecognizable. He was covered in blood, swollen, cut up, chunks of skin missing, a mangled arm and leg. One of the firefighters I was with was looking really upset and confused. She looked like she was holding back tears, then looked angry, then looked determined, and would go through those phases in turn, and not always in that order. Usually I would ask, "Hey, what's wrong?" But not entirely appropriate when you're rescuing some kid who'll probably pass away in the helicopter. Turns out she was able to recognize the car, but wasn't able to recognize her friend. She was one of the first on the scene and was playing a primary role of getting him out, before the thought occurred that she might know him. After he was freed from the car and moved to the stretcher to be treated, she did recognize him. I could see it on her face. She, somehow, amazingly kept her cool. The EMTs cleaned up the kid's face and were getting ready to do any patchwork they could. The cleaner his face got, the easier it would be to identify him. I watched her face turn from her determined, "This is my job" look, slowly into a look of horror and anger, the "I don't want to be here right now" face. Her face squished up like she just ate a lemon. It looked like she was trying to keep all her tears and cries from escaping, then immediately went back to, "This is my job." By the time the lifestyle landed in the field, we had the kid strapped in and ready to go, and a little patched. We all hauled him up the tiny little tree-lined slope to get to the field, and he was loaded into the helicopter and left for the hospital. Then she lost it. She fell to the ground like her legs didn't work and screamed and sobbed. Only one of the guys knew exactly what was going on, but he didn't say anything. Another firefighter who was closer to her sat with her arm around her for comfort. But it didn't stop her wailing sobs and her talking helplessly to herself. Things like, "Why did it have to be him?" and "Goddamn, what an idiot," and blaming herself. Later in the week, we had a discussion about the accident and what was determined exactly to have caused it, the kid's status, and our review of how we handled it. That's also when we found out why she was so heartbroken about the kid. She stood in front of everybody and told us that he was a very close friend of hers from school, and she didn't even think about it being someone she knew until they started pulling him out of the car. She said she told herself it's no one she knew and to keep herself calm, but she definitely recognized him by the time the helicopter was ready to take him. She said she was pretty much holding her breath the entire time up until the copter came to keep herself from crying, and when he was gone could she finally let it out. She knew he might not make it, which was the most upsetting thing for her. The fact that she was directly involved in saving his life would weigh heavily as well, and no doubt she'd place blame on herself if he died. They determined the cause of the accident was him taking a turn too fast, slid sideways and hit the tree with the back fender of his car, which sent it spinning in the road, and, in the turn, hit the slight slope that was just steep enough to get his car to roll over a few times back onto the road. Our overall review was okay. Everything about the accident was handled as it should be. Sand was put down to absorb car juices. We cut the car open properly, moved all the large chunks out of the road so what little traffic came by could get past, and they handled the kid just fine too. Everything was done as correctly as it could be for what had happened, but the guy ended up passing anyway. He was the same age as the girl firefighter who helped rescue him, so 21 at the time. That's probably the worst single car accident I have ever seen. My town is small, very hilly and very swervy. It's easy to go way too fast on the roads here, especially if you don't live here and don't know all the turns and when to slow down. It was predicted the kid was going over 80, which is insanely fast for the road he was on. When I heard that, I was surprised he didn't literally fly off the road and into the woods, and that any tree would have stopped him enough to just spin a few times. I couldn't believe it. 80 miles per hour. My car shakes off if I try to go that fast on a highway. It suddenly made all the damage to the car make sense. But anyway, there you go. Probably the worst non-fire related call I've ever been on. I should also mention this is the first heavy call I went on as a firefighter. Most things before this were burnt toast at the old folks home, or being called to assist a town with a fire that they've already got under control. If it isn't obvious from this story, please drive safely. Remember, it's far better to be 1 minute late somewhere than your family to have to sit through a minute of silence. This is a story from my childhood that I recently remembered while in the shower. I spent my childhood in Mallorca with my grandparents. They lived in the middle of nowhere and didn't even have asphalt roads until I was 6, but I always loved it there. I used to explore the area all the time, and my grandparents weren't exactly overprotective, so I was alone a lot of the time, though I did do some hikes with Grandma. Plus, it's not like there's any danger around there. This story happened when I was about 10, and wandered further south on one of my lone hikes in the forest than ever before. Keep in mind, this is the forest with a sand floor, full of rocks, and generally pretty dry, not creepy in the slightest. I found a pair of rusty old train tracks that had obviously not been used in a very long time. They were overgrown, had plants sprout high between them, and in one massive spot, a huge tree branch extended across them. I followed them westward, for that was closer to the town I lived in, and ended up in what seemed to be an abandoned little village. I say village, but this wasn't like an old western mining town, just some wooden houses that had obviously been built quite recently, and some even had satellite dishes on them. However, all of them were locked with modern padlocks, and the windows were also dark, so I never found out what they actually were. There were no roads anywhere, just these strange houses built on stilts for some reason. This was neither usual nor necessary. The train tracks, however, ended in that abandoned village, and they did so quite unceremoniously, with just one of those full stop breaks you find near the end of train tracks, which was also pretty battered and rusty. I never found out where the train leads to the east, because it was far too long away for a boy of 10 years to do, and after showing my friends this certainly odd thing, we lost interest after a while. Enter one of those nightmares in which nothing really happens, but you wake up with a feeling of dread. I was standing somewhere along the tracks during daytime, and a train with a proper steam-powered locomotive races by. The interesting thing were the passengers. They wore so many styles of exotic clothing, some of them so different that they didn't just quite fit. It wasn't just a different time period and culture, but styles you'd expect to see in sci-fi and fantasy films. A guy in a blue toga was sat next to a woman in a grey suit, ripped straight from a cyberpunk game. So I did what any curious 10-year-old boy would do, and went to see the tracks the next day. All the plants that had grown between the ties and over the tracks were severed clean or crushed, and that big tree branch was about 1 kilometer down the railroad that had broken off and had been thrown about 5 or 7 meters. The wound, if you call it that, was still pretty fresh, so it must have happened recently. The strange thing was that, judging from where I found the branch, the train must have come from the tiny settlement, which is impossible, considering that there is no train there in the first place. I told this to a friend of mine at school, and she claimed she had the same dream, though to be fair, she always talked about how she had psychic powers and stuff. Not to mention that she was into me, but we were primary school kids. Nothing weird ever happened after that, at least not concerning the railroad or the strange train. I had this 19-year-old kid with fetal alcohol syndrome living in my condo complex with his family. The parents were drunks, and he had no friends. So one day while I was on my balcony, we got to chatting, and I invited him over to play some video games. It all went well, and I told him he could hang out again with me sometime. Well, he took that to mean every waking hour. For the next few weeks he would call incessantly, and wait until I got home and just ring on my doorbell non-stop, to the point that I couldn't go an hour with him bugging me. Even when it was 1 a.m. on a weekday, he would sometimes ring the doorbell. Despite all the talks I had with him telling him to chill and to not contact me constantly, he just wouldn't stop. Over the next month or so, it actually got worse until it reached a breaking point, and I said enough is enough, and that he was no longer welcome. The last incident was where the creepiness kicked into high gear. There was another 1 a.m. door knock, and like all the previous times before, I just ignored it, made sure my doors were locked, and the lights remained off. When I got up in the morning to leave work, I saw a mostly empty bottle of whiskey and a large knife just laying on my front door. I have no idea what he had planned, or if it was even him who left those things, but I'm pretty glad I didn't open the door and give him an earful about respecting people's personal space. This happened about 7 years ago. I was staying at my friend Diana's house. She lives pretty close to a small beach, which is really more of a vague shoreline, but it's still nice. We both enjoy going on adventures, so one night we decided to go for a walk, and ended up walking along the shore. Her dog Penny was with us, occasionally running out into the water, doing cute dog things. I'm not a huge dog person, so I'm not sure what kind of dog she was, but she was a medium-sized dog. Not big, but way too big to be called small. We were only there for 10 minutes before we heard a twig snap from the forest at the edge of the shore. Both of us froze, listening to see if we could hear anything. We thought we heard someone shushing someone else, but we brushed it off as being paranoid and remained on high alert. The tide was coming in, and there was only one way back to safety, a single path which we had come down on. Everywhere else was essentially a cliff covered in thorns and whatnot, not fun to climb. We started making our way back to the path, taking our shoes off since we realized we waited too long and wouldn't make it before the water reached us. As we were walking, we heard more twigs snapping in the forest and hushed voices. We looked at each other and paused. Diana asked me what we should do, and I really didn't know. Everyone at her home was asleep, so we couldn't call them, and we didn't want to call the police if it wasn't a dangerous situation. I ended up telling her we had no choice. We had to make it to the path before the tide came in. We start again, picking up the pace a little, coaxing Penny along with us. It's at this moment that we heard a growl and a low bark, followed quickly with more shushing sounds. I could hear the voices, though I don't remember what I heard them say. There were 2 men, and they had a dog. There are no houses this close to the shore. Diana's house is the closest, and it's a good 5-minute walk away. The forest that surrounds the shore is pretty thick, and it's not good for camping in. There's no viable reason for someone to just be hanging out there. We both registered this and start to run. I heard one of the men yell, "Go get him!" and heard the dog's collar jingle as it started to run. Penny was right behind us, so when we saw the silhouette of a dog in front of us, we knew it wasn't her. The dog started growling, and Penny was bouncing around playfully behind us, clearly not sensing this dog's aggression, as she was a very young dog. We stood still, unaware of what to do. The sound of twigs breaking was getting closer, and Diana carefully knelt down to get a rock and tossed it towards the forest, to which the dog and Penny went chasing after it. Diana was worried about Penny, but we both kept running and hardly stopped for a breath. When we made it to the path, before the tide I might add, we could see flashlight beams in the forest and heard the men cursing and clumsily maneuvering their way through the branches. We called for Penny as silently as we could, but she never came. We ended up having to leave without her as the men were getting too close. We ran back to her house and locked the door, and haven't talked about what happened since. Penny showed up the next morning perfectly fine, in case anyone was wondering. I've had a few strange encounters with sketchy people, but this one was the only time I ever felt truly in danger. This was when I was working as a nurse at an Ebola clinic in Liberia. Most of the patients that had Ebola and died didn't hemorrhage much, a little vomiting and diarrhea, but nothing of hot zone level, except for one guy. It was myself, a Liberian sprayer, and a Liberian nurse. We suited up to take a man out the back of the Liberian ambulance, a pickup truck with a covered bed and a washable mattress. This guy was in his early 20s and was in poor condition. He crawled onto a stretcher we laid down for him. He was sweating profusely and his eyes were already blood red. The blood red of a man ready to die from Ebola. He didn't speak any English, just smattering off Capellean moans. He rolled on his side and vomited. A slow, gelatinous mass rolled out of his mouth, as dark as 1,000 moonless African nights. It left his body thick as an apple. It rolled out of his body and splattered against the canvas of the stretcher, covering my Tyvek suit from the knees down in dark blood. For those 2 seconds it was leaving his body, before it splattered on the stretcher, it was alive. It was Ebola incarnate. We washed the man off with 0.05% bleach solution and took him inside. We did an Ebola test, PCR, and pushed a litre of fluid and 1 litre of oral rehydration salts. This perked him right up. He sat up, asked for food, and ate a generous portion of fufu. We thought we had managed to turn things around and that he might make it, but he was dead in 2 hours. I still can't look at Jello today without thinking of him. I was 18 years old and on my way home to California on summer break after my sophomore year of college. I had a 9-hour car ride ahead of me and stocked up on energy drinks, soda, and snacks for the ride home. I left school late after dinner with friends and planned on driving into the night. I'm making good time, and I'm around 3 or 4 hours from home, which was Yuba City at the time. I'm an hour outside Reno and on a lonely stretch of road when it happened. I suddenly get the urge to pee. Those energy drinks I chugged coming back to haunt me, and I kick myself in the arse for not stopping when I had gassed up 45 minutes before. I saw a sign that advertised a rest stop coming up, and so I drove the few miles to the sign, then pulled in. Parked in the parking lot was a ratchet-looking sedan, and on the other side of the lot, a Sprinter-type van. I quickly got out and hurriedly jogged to the restroom before I peed myself. I was flushing when I heard someone enter, and I froze. I'm in decent physical shape, and I work out quite often, but for a guy, I'm on the smaller side at only 5'7" and 160 pounds. So I'm bracing myself for some Michael Myers type stuff when I open the door and see an average Joe looking guy. He looks up, gives me a friendly smile, and then steps over to the urinal. I washed my hands and was getting ready to leave when he starts talking. His voice was gravelly and low, so I couldn't hear him the first time. "You like dogs, man?" he asked me as he washed his hands. He was wearing those coveralls that mechanics wear, and he had grease stains on it. My creeper meter started beeping. I shot him a friendly smile and said, "Yeah man, dogs are cool," as I left. Well, that was the wrong thing to say, because he comes out the door almost at my heel. "I got a new puppy. Wanna see him? He's real cute." Now I'm freaking out. Keys are in one hand and my cell phone in the other. I call back in a shaky voice, "Nah, thanks. Gotta get going." I'm getting to my car when he grabs the door, trying to open it wider. This dude was strong, and he's a good few inches smaller than me. I start my car and put my phone to my ear, and what he said next caused me to almost crap my pants. "Time the cops are here. You'll already be finished." With that, I kicked at his stomach, and thank goodness it connected. He let go of the door and fell on his ass. I then locked the doors and screeched the hell out of that rest stop. I saw him scramble for his car, but I didn't stay around enough to watch, and I took off like a bat out of hell. I was a nervous wreck for the next 3 hours, thinking he was going to follow me home and finish me off. When I got home, I told my dad, who had stayed up to wait for me, about what happened, and he told me to not call the authorities. I made sure to take an entirely different route when I went back to school in the fall, and because of that, I've never stopped at another rest stop ever again. So dude, wherever you are, I don't want to see your puppy. This story happened to my dad in the late 80s. His sister used to live in New Orleans, Louisiana, and my dad was down there to visit her. One day she was busy, so he decided to occupy himself for a few hours until she was available. He went to the French Quarter to check it out, having never been before. He happened upon what he described as a little voodoo store. He walked in and immediately didn't feel right. The floor was hot. The floorboards were made of wood, which were older and a little warped, probably from being mopped often, and otherwise seemed normal, except they were hot. At the back of the store, which was filled with all kinds of weird knickknacks and things you'd pretty much expect to be associated with a voodoo-oriented place, like bones and tinctures and feathers and other things, there was an old lady sitting by herself. He assumes she was the shop owner or attendant. She got his attention when she simply said, "Hello, Michael." That's my dad's name. He looks at her and tries to respond. She was obviously blind. Both eyes were completely cloudy and milky white. He didn't say anything. He just noped the hell out of there and left. Both of my maternal grandparents died before I was born, so I've obviously never met them. When I was around 5 weeks old, I got really sick and almost died. They even had a priest come in and read me my last rites, fearing I wouldn't make it out of the NICU. I lived, but continued to have related health problems, including asthma and croup, basically waking up completely out of breath and unable to take a breath in or out. I'm the youngest by 4 years, so when my siblings went to school, it was just me and my mum. We lived in a pretty big house, and my room was upstairs and far from the staircase. My mum and friends she has had over have both told me this to be true. There have been times when I had croup as an infant, and my mum would be in the kitchen, and the cabinets would fly open, and stuff would come crashing out. She knew this was the sign to check on me. She has also heard pounding in my room, which definitely couldn't have been the suffocating infant. I just want to say thank you to my grandparents for watching over me like that. I don't think I would be here today if it weren't for their ghosts.